Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving east on Route 87 just past midnight, somewhere between Roundup and Grass Range. That stretch of highway is long, empty, and dark. No towns, no lights, barely any other cars. It was late September, cold enough that I had the heat on low and the windows up. I had a thermos of coffee in the passenger seat and an old country playlist running through my truck's Bluetooth. I wasn't tired exactly, but I was zoning out a little, just trying to make miles. That part of Montana is flat in some spots and hilly in others. You can see for miles when you hit the right rise, especially on a clear night like that. The sky was sharp with stars, like someone had punched holes in black paper. Not a single cloud. I remember I was passing mile marker 101 when I noticed something weird. The stars directly in front of me, just ahead over the road, started disappearing, not all at once. It was like someone was pulling a curtain across the sky, left to right. First a few, then a dozen, then a patch as wide as my windshield. I slowed down, thinking maybe some fog was rolling in or a thin cloud bank, but it wasn't that. There was no haze, no shift in temperature, and the stars around the missing section stayed clear and bright. I leaned forward over the steering wheel and stared up through the windshield. The shape that was blocking the stars wasn't visible exactly, it wasn't lit, but I could tell it was there by what it was covering. It was a void, a moving absence, like someone had cut out part of the sky and pasted over it with something perfectly black. It wasn't shaped like a plane or anything with wings. It was just flat, wide, silent, and slow. The radio cut out at that exact moment. Not gradually, just silence, then a beep, like when you hold the power button too long. Then it switched to the setup screen like it was fresh out of the box. Factory reset. No saved stations, no Bluetooth devices. Like someone had wiped it clean. I hadn't touched anything. I pulled over onto the shoulder. There weren't any other cars in sight. No taillights, no headlights coming up behind. I turned off the engine and stepped out, keeping the door open behind me. The only sound was the wind. Dry grass hissing along the ditch. No insects, no distant highway hum. Just me in the dark. I tilted my head back again, and the stars were still missing. The shape had stopped moving. It was just hovering, covering maybe a third of the visible sky above the road. No lights, no sound. It didn't feel like anything was watching me, but it also didn't feel like I was alone. Then, all at once, the stars came back. No transition. 1 second they were gone, the next they were back in perfect clarity, like flipping a light switch. I blinked a few times and waited, but nothing else happened. I got back in the truck and turned the key. The dashboard lit up like usual, but the clock had reset to 12, blinking. My phone still had signal, and when I checked the time, it said 12:46 a.m. I'd looked at the dashboard just before pulling over. It was 12:19 then. I had lost almost 30 minutes. I tried syncing the phone back to the radio, but the system didn't even recognize it. I had to repair the Bluetooth like it had never been connected. The entire system had been wiped. My contacts, playlists, even the name I gave the truck in the interface, gone. I drove another 15 miles to the next pullout, a little rest stop with a picnic table and trash bins. I parked and just sat there for a while, staring out across the prairie. Still no other cars, no planes, just darkness and silence. I kept looking up, half expecting something to block out the sky again, but it didn't. The only odd thing after that was the engine. It ran fine, but the idle felt different somehow, a little rougher maybe. Like something had changed in how it handled, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I had the truck checked the following week. Nothing wrong, no codes thrown. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few days. Then I mentioned it to my brother, Craig, just casually. He's an electrical engineer in Helena. I figured if anyone would have an explanation for a wiped radio and 30 minutes of dead time, it'd be him. But all he said was, "Huh, that's weird," and changed the subject. A few nights later, I checked the truck again, just out of curiosity. I went through all the presets, looked for any saved history, nothing. But when I flipped over to AM, one of the buttons was still mapped. Just one. It wasn't something I'd ever saved. It was set to a frequency way off the normal range, like 1720 or something, farther up than I thought the dial even went. When I clicked it, all I heard was a faint whine. Not static, not a voice, just a low, wavering tone. It didn't sound like any station bleed or interference. It sounded almost patterned, like a signal that meant something, but not for me. I turned it off. Didn't touch it again. A few months passed. No more missing stars, no more blank skies. But I started noticing something with my phone. Random photos would appear in the camera roll. Black frames, like someone had taken a picture in a pitch-dark room. Always around midnight. I chalked it up to pocket taps, even though I keep the phone locked. One night, I went through the metadata out of curiosity. One of the black photos had a GPS tag. That wasn't unusual. But it didn't match where I'd been. It was 5 miles north, near an old dirt access road I hadn't been down in years. The timestamp was 12:31 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was asleep at home that night. I drove out there the next weekend. There was nothing to see, just gravel and fields and an old grain silo that had been rusted out for a decade. But when I stopped and stepped out of the truck, my ears started ringing. Not loud, not painful, just a steady pressure. I got back in and drove home. I haven't gone back. The truck still runs fine. No more wipes, no more missing time. But sometimes I'd drive that stretch of 87 and catch myself staring up at the sky too long, just waiting, watching. Every once in a while, I think I see something move up there, a shape that doesn't quite belong, but the stars don't go out. Not yet. I woke up at exactly 3:11 a.m. because of a sound I didn't hear so much as feel. It was this low humming, like standing next to a huge generator or transformer, but it didn't come from any one direction. It felt like it was coming from inside my chest. Not painful, not even loud, but dense somehow. I sat up thinking maybe it was a dream, but the vibration was still there, not the kind you get from a bass speaker. Deeper than that, lower. It stopped maybe 5 or 6 seconds later, just cut off completely. I looked around the room in the dark. Everything seemed normal until I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. The screen showed the time, 3:11, but the charging symbol was gone. I reached for it, and the cable was still plugged in, but the phone wasn't charging. I sat there for a few seconds, and then I noticed the hallway outside my bedroom was pitch black. Normally, there's a little glow from the stove clock and the router lights out in the kitchen, but it was completely dark. I got up and went out into the hallway. Every digital clock in the house was blinking. Microwave, oven, cable box. Even the little one I keep in the laundry room, which is battery operated, was blinking like it had been reset. I checked my phone again, and it was charging now. It had 72%, which is weird because I plugged it in at 19% before I went to sleep. I remember the number because I almost didn't bother plugging it in. The power had obviously gone out at some point, but nothing else in the house had tripped. No breakers, no blown bulbs. I looked out the front window and the streetlights were still on. The neighbor across the road has those cheap solar-powered walkway lights, and those were glowing too. I live in a small town outside Missoula, Montana. Quiet neighborhood, mostly older folks, not a place where weird things usually happen. I stood there looking out at the street for a while, thinking maybe a transformer had blown and reset some stuff without killing the lights completely, but I never heard anything like that before. And that humming, I don't know. It felt like it was inside the house, inside me, but left no trace. I eventually went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up every hour or so, just feeling on edge. No more sounds, no more vibrations. Just that uneasy static in my chest like something was waiting. The next day, I asked my neighbor Wayne if his clocks had reset. He said no. His power had been fine all night, and his security camera didn't catch anything. He's retired and runs a bunch of little cameras off a DVR system. He offered to check the timestamp, but said there were no gaps or glitches between 3 and 4 a.m. Later that evening, I noticed something else. My thermostat had been bumped. It was set 4 degrees higher than usual. I don't remember touching it. I live alone, no pets, no one else with access. The weird thing was the override mode was on, like someone had manually adjusted it at the wall unit. It's one of those Honeywell smart thermostats, and I usually control it through the app. When I checked the app history, there was a gap in the logs. Right around 3 a.m., I didn't say anything to anyone else, just tried to brush it off. But 2 nights later, I woke up at almost the exact same time, 3:12 a.m., and felt that same vibration. This time, it only lasted about 3 seconds. I sat up, waiting for it to stop, and it did, just like before. I got up immediately, checked the clocks, and they were all fine. Nothing was blinking. But the room smelled faintly like hot electronics, like the scent you get when a laptop's been running too long. I went out onto the back deck and stood there for a bit. The air was cold and still, no wind at all. I kept looking up, scanning the sky for something, anything, but it was overcast and the clouds were too thick to see any stars. Then I noticed the porch light, which is motion activated, was still off. It should have triggered when I stepped out. I waved my arm at it, nothing. I even stepped off the deck and walked across the gravel. Still nothing. When I came back inside, I pulled the bulb from the fixture to check it. It wasn't hot, it wasn't even warm. But when I screwed it back in and flipped the breaker just in case, it worked again. It lit up immediately like nothing was wrong. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with all the lights on. It just felt better that way. Safer, maybe. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. No more humming, no strange smells, no electronic glitches. But then that Saturday, something new did happen. I went to grab dinner with a friend in town, Courtney, and when I got back to my house, the driveway security light triggered before I even pulled in. That part wasn't strange. What was strange was the notification I got on my phone. My smart home app had logged unusual movement at 3:10 p.m. and again at 3:11 p.m. from the indoor living room cam. When I checked the feed, it was just static. The whole minute was a solid gray fuzz. Then the footage picked up again, completely normal. No sign of anyone in the house, nothing moved or missing. I downloaded the clip and tried boosting the contrast on my computer. It didn't help much, but I noticed there was a moment, barely a second, where the static pulsed just slightly, like something passed in front of the lens, blocking the light. It wasn't shaped like a person or even an object. It was just a slow, dim shift in the brightness, almost like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. I unplugged the indoor cam after that, haven't plugged it back in. I still don't know what any of it was. I haven't told Courtney or anyone else. What would I even say? My clocks blinked and my porch light didn't turn on. A few weeks have gone by now, no more humming, no more glitches, but I've noticed a pattern. I wake up now at almost exactly 3:11 a.m. most nights. No alarm, no noise. I just open my eyes, check the clock, and it's always within a minute of that time. It's not fear anymore. It's more like something waiting, like I'm supposed to notice something and haven't yet. I moved the bedroom clock out last night and put in an old analog one. No lights, no digital anything. I still woke up at 3:11, but this time I didn't move. I just lay there, breathing quietly, eyes closed. I swear the air felt different for a few seconds. Like something big had just passed through the room without touching anything. Then it was gone, and I went back to sleep. I woke up with my heart pounding like someone had slammed a door downstairs. I thought I heard my name, Mark, clear as anything, like it had come from just outside my bedroom window. Not yelled, but not whispered either. More like someone was trying not to wake the whole house, just me. I sat up, held my breath for a second. My room was quiet except for the ceiling fan ticking slightly as it rotated. I live alone in a small house on the edge of Lanesboro, Minnesota. Quiet town, nothing much ever happens. Neighbors aren't close enough to just randomly call out like that, especially not at 3:17 a.m. I got up and went to the window. I didn't flip on the lights because I didn't want to ruin my night vision. The yard looked normal. Grass faintly silver in the moonlight. Nothing moving. But it felt off. I couldn't say why. The silence was heavy, like the way air feels before a storm, even though the sky was totally clear. I opened the window and leaned out a bit. "Hello?" I whispered. Nothing. I walked to the front door and eased it open, trying not to let the hinges creak. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was warmer than it had been earlier that night. Not muggy, just wrong. Like the temperature wasn't matching what my body expected from the look of the place. I reached up and lightly touched the porch light bulb. It was warm. Not hot, but definitely like it had just been on. Except I always turn that off before bed. and the switch inside was still flipped down. I even checked it again just to be sure. There was no one in the yard, no car driving off, no footsteps on the gravel. I stood there barefoot for maybe 2 minutes, just staring at the trees across the road. They weren't moving. No wind, no bugs chirping. That was the next thing that struck me. The total lack of sound. No crickets, no distant owls, nothing. It was like someone had muted the world. I ended up stepping into the grass to walk around a bit, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank or maybe a kid had wandered over from town. But I didn't see anything. I walked out past the mailbox and looked up and down the road. No cars, no people, and still no sound. Just the soft crunch of my own footsteps. As I turned back toward the house, something moved in my peripheral vision. Up, not sideways. I looked up fast, but the sky was empty. Except it didn't feel empty. I don't know how else to describe it. The stars were out, clear night, and I could see them just fine. Except in one spot. Not a cloud. Just a patch of sky where the stars looked faint, like I was seeing them through something semi-transparent. Heat shimmer, maybe? But it was too high up, too still. It didn't move like heat does. It was just there. A patch the size of a small car, maybe. Then it faded, and I saw the stars clearly again. I didn't move for a long time. I was scared to. Eventually, I backed up onto the porch and went inside. I locked the door, turned on the hallway light, and sat at the kitchen table. I must have sat there an hour, just listening. Still no bugs. Still too warm. Around 4:30, everything came back all at once. Crickets, wind, a distant dog barking, like somebody had hit unpause on the world. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. The next night, I stayed up late on purpose just to see if anything weird would happen again. I turned off all the lights and sat by the living room window that faces the yard. Nothing happened. But at 3:11 a.m., the porch light flicked on by itself. Just for a second. Then it clicked off again. I went out and checked. The bulb was warm again. The third night, I brought out an old digital thermometer and stuck it on the porch railing. I also set my phone to record video out the window. I didn't get anything unusual on the video, but I checked the thermometer after the light blinked on again, same time, almost to the minute, and it read 74 degrees. The air temperature that night was 56. I even called the power company just to rule out any weird surges or outages. They said there was nothing in my area. I didn't mention the light thing. A few nights later, I thought it had stopped. I slept fine, no lights, no noise. But then my phone buzzed with a notification from the motion-activated camera I'd installed on the porch earlier that week. It was a short clip, maybe 2 seconds long. In the footage, the porch light doesn't turn on, but the yard flashes bright white, like a camera flash, and then nothing. No sound. Just the light. It lit up everything, and there was no source visible. Just brightness, like someone had shined a spotlight from nowhere. I stepped through the video frame by frame. In one of the frames, I could swear the shadows look wrong, like they're all pointing inward toward a spot above the lawn. The next night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and waited. Nothing happened. No flash, no sound. But I started to feel watched. Not paranoia exactly. It felt too physical for that. Like someone was standing just behind the hedges at the edge of the yard, just inside the dark. I couldn't hear breathing or movement. I just felt it. I ended up saying something out loud. I don't even know why. I said, "You can leave now." I meant it as a joke, kind of. Just trying to break the tension. But the moment I said it, the porch light blinked on. Not flickered. Full on. Stayed on for 10 seconds, then shut off. I didn't go outside again for a few days. The most recent thing was 3 nights ago. I woke up at exactly 3:11 again. No sound, no lights, but the clock on my microwave was flashing like the power had gone out, except nothing else in the house had reset. My fridge clock was fine. My phone hadn't lost power, only the microwave. I walked into the kitchen to reset it and happened to glance out the window. In the reflection on the glass, I saw what looked like a light behind me, small, bluish. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. I looked back at the window, no light in the reflection anymore either. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I started thinking maybe it was stress, maybe I was dreaming and not realizing it, but that doesn't explain the warm bulb, or the thermometer, or the footage. I haven't told anyone in town. It's small here, word gets around. People start talking. I don't want to be that guy. I replaced the porch bulb with a new one. Halogen. Different brand. I even unscrewed it slightly so it couldn't make a full connection. But 2 nights ago, it lit up anyway, despite being physically disconnected. That was the last time I slept with the bedroom window open. I'm not saying what it was. I'm not claiming anything. All I know is something's been showing up around 3:11 a.m. and it seems to know my name. It was around 10:30 on a Thursday night, early October. I just finished cleaning up dinner and remembered the trash had to go out. Collection was Friday morning. I was barefoot, wearing just a hoodie and old sweatpants, walking the can down the side of the house to the curb. It had been a quiet night. No wind, just that cold stillness that settles in when the temperature drops quick after dark. We live in a cul-de-sac outside of Medford, Oregon. Suburban, but on the edge of a more rural patch. A few houses, big yards, and nothing but woods behind our fence line. I got to the curb and popped the lid shut on the can when I noticed a soft light to my left, like someone had flicked on a porch lamp across the way. But it wasn't a lamp. Across the street, just above the Wilkinsons' house, maybe 25 feet above their roofline, there was a pale bluish-white light. Oval-shaped, not blinking, not swaying, just hanging there. The Wilkinsons were out of town that week, so I knew it wasn't them messing with anything. My first thought was drone, but it didn't move like a drone. No tilt, no hum, completely still. And it wasn't that sharp LED white most drones have. This was softer, almost foggy, like light shining through frosted glass. I stood there watching it for maybe 10 seconds, and I don't remember hearing a thing. No bugs, no breeze, no distant traffic, just silence. I looked down the street. No other lights, no other people. Just the yellow porch glow from a few houses and that pale thing over the roof. Then it dimmed, not all at once. It faded like someone turning down a dimmer switch slowly. When it got to the point I could barely see it, it didn't fly off or move. It just vanished, like it blinked out. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the spot. Nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the same quiet street I've lived on for 12 years. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. Didn't say anything to my wife, Erin. She was already half asleep on the couch. The next morning, I walked across the street before work, just to see. There was nothing on the Wilkinsons' lawn or roof. No signs of anyone having been there. No scorched patches, no tire tracks, nothing out of place. I tried to forget about it. Figured maybe I saw a reflection. Maybe someone behind me opened a window and it caught some light weird. But that night, around the same time, I was in the kitchen finishing dishes when the motion light in our backyard clicked on. I glanced out the window, thinking maybe a raccoon or one of the stray cats from down the hill. There was nothing, just the yard. Still, dimly lit, leaves shifting in the breeze. But the light stayed on longer than it should have. Usually it turns off after 30 seconds, but this time it lasted a full minute before shutting off. I didn't go outside. The third night, Saturday, is when things got harder to explain. Around 10:45, I stepped out to grab a hoodie from the car. It had rained earlier and the air was damp. I didn't notice anything at first, but as I walked up the driveway, I felt something shift, like pressure in my ears, almost like when you're gaining altitude in a plane. A soft, muffled pop, then that thick quiet again, like sound was being soaked up by something. I turned around and looked across the street. Nothing above the Wilkinsons this time, but farther off, past the end of the cul-de-sac, above the tree line, I saw movement. Something dark shifted against the sky. It wasn't lit, and it wasn't shaped like a plane or bird. It was wide and slow and wrong. I froze. Tried to trace it, but it blended into the sky so well I could only track it by what stars it blocked out, just like a smear in the air. No lights, no sound. It floated past, maybe 200 or 300 feet up, heading east over the trees, and then I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there, hand on the driver's side door, until a car came down the street, headlights snapping me out of it. When they passed, everything felt normal again. Ears unpopped, night sounds returned, motion light didn't go off, nothing dramatic, but I couldn't shake the feeling something had just been here, watching. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Woke up at 3:17 a.m. on the dot. No sound, no dream, just wide awake. I lay there for a while, trying not to look at the window, not really sure why. The next morning, I checked the cameras. We have two. One doorbell cam, one mounted over the garage. Both record motion-triggered clips to a cloud account. I scanned through the feed from 10 p.m. to midnight the night before. There was nothing. Literally nothing. No clips, just a gap. It jumped from 9:53 p.m. to 12:12 a.m., like the system just didn't detect anything, which was weird because it should have picked up me going to the car or that passing vehicle. It always does. I checked the camera settings, all normal. Wi-Fi was solid, timestamp accurate. I even walked out to test it. The second I stepped into the frame, it recorded me just fine. I told Erin about all of it that evening. Not the first night, but the past two. The silence, the thing over the trees, the camera weirdness. She kind of brushed it off, said maybe I was overtired, maybe the software glitched, so I didn't press it. But I kept paying attention. A week went by with nothing. No lights, no motion triggers, no waking up at 3 a.m. Then on a Wednesday, I came home from work and something was off the second I walked in. The kitchen clock was flashing 12. Microwave 2. We hadn't lost power, nothing else was blinking. My laptop was still logged in, Erin's phone still charged. I asked her if she noticed the clocks. She just frowned and said no, said they were normal when she left for work at 7:30. So sometime between 7:30 and 6 p.m., only the kitchen clocks reset and nothing else. That night I took the trash out again around 10:20. Sky was overcast, no stars. I stood in the driveway a little longer than usual, just watching. And there it was again. This time farther back, above the trees behind the Wilkinsons' property. Same pale, hazy light, hovering, not moving, no beam, just there. I didn't go any closer. I didn't look away. I just stood there, breathing slow, staring at it for what felt like a full minute. Then it dimmed, same as before, slow, soft, until it was gone. The second it vanished, my porch light flickered once, just a quick blink, then back to normal. I turned and went inside. I didn't check the cameras, didn't want to know if they saw it or not. I just made sure the door was locked, drew the blinds, and went to bed. We were camping up near Lake Sylvia in Washington. Me, my cousin Travis, and his buddy Eli. We'd gone up Friday afternoon, early September, that little pocket of time where the evenings are cool but not freezing, and the mosquitoes finally start to back off. The spot was a few miles off the forest road, not a marked campground, just a place Travis had gone to a couple times with his dad when they used to fish. No cell signal, no ranger check-ins, just a little flat clearing by a stream with enough space for 2 tents and a fire pit made of piled rocks. The first night was normal. We cooked brats, drank cheap beer, watched the fire, talked about dumb stuff. It was dark as hell past the firelight, but nothing unusual. We all slept fine. The next night started the same way. We'd hiked a bit during the day, found some animal bones by the water, probably a deer, nothing fresh. That kind of thing feels normal when you're out in it, you know? Anyway, by around 11 p.m., the fire was dying down. Eli had already gone to bed, and Travis was laying on his back looking at the sky. I'd gotten up to take a piss and walked a little past the tents into the trees. Not far, maybe 20, 30 feet. I had my flashlight with me, just a small handheld LED one, nothing fancy. I wasn't thinking about anything, just standing there half asleep, when I noticed the beam of the flashlight looked off. It wasn't flickering or dimming, but it was bending. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't a spotlight or diffused beam. It had a clear edge, and the edge of that beam was curving slightly to the left, like it hit a patch of hot air or water vapor. I moved my hand. The beam stayed bent for a second, then straightened back out like normal. I thought maybe it was smoke from the fire catching in the air, but the fire was low and behind me, no smoke that far out. Then I saw movement, not right in front of me, off to the left, between the trees. It wasn't clear, just an outline, like when you catch something through frosted glass. A vague shape that was there, and then wasn't. I froze. The woods were dead quiet. No wind, no branches creaking, no bugs chirping. I whispered, "Travis?" Before I even realized it was a dumb question. Travis was back by the fire. I could still see the flicker of orange through the trees behind me. I waited, listening. Nothing moved. The air felt weird, heavy, like it was pressing in on me, even though it wasn't cold or humid. I swept the flashlight toward where the outline had, but now the beam was normal, sharp, clean. I took a slow step back toward camp, then another. I didn't run or call out. I don't know why. I think I didn't want to make whatever it was know I saw it. When I got back to the tents, Travis was sitting up now, rubbing his face. "You hear something?" he asked. "Did you see anything over there?" I asked, nodding toward the trees. He looked at me for a second, then shook his head. "Like what?" "I don't know," I said. "Light bent weird. Saw a shape. Just something." He didn't laugh or brush it off. He just stood up and grabbed his headlamp. We both walked over there, quietly. Nothing. The ground looked the same. Leaves, sticks, a couple of old fire rings from other campers. No footprints but mine. Then I saw something new. A tree, maybe 10 feet tall, with bark stripped in a spiral about chest high. Clean. No bite marks. No claw gouges. Just the outer bark peeled off in a spiral band, like someone had twisted it by hand. Travis hadn't noticed it before, and he's good at spotting weird stuff like that. We went back to the tents. Neither of us said much. We didn't wake Eli. That night, I kept hearing little noises. Not twigs snapping, but soft shifts, like someone brushing against fabric. Once or twice, I thought I saw a pale light through the tent wall, but it was so faint I couldn't be sure. Could have been moonlight, though I don't think the moon was up. The next morning, Eli said he slept like a rock. No dreams, no sounds. Travis said he didn't sleep much. I looked around in the daylight, but there was nothing new. The peeled tree was still there. No tracks, no marks. We packed up after breakfast and hiked out early. It wasn't until we got back to the truck that I noticed the time on the dash was wrong. It was behind by about 15 minutes. I figured maybe the battery had drained a little, but the truck started fine, and my phone still had the correct time. Eli's did too. No one said anything about it on the drive home. I didn't bring up the flashlight again, and Travis didn't mention the stripped bark. But a few days later, he texted me a photo of his headlamp. The plastic lens had this weird foggy ring on it, like heat damage, but it still worked. We haven't been back to that spot since. I woke up to Luna growling, not barking, just this low, constant rumble deep in her chest. It took me a second to even realize what I was hearing. I live alone, and I usually sleep with a box fan running, so it kind of blended in at first. The room was dark. I remember glancing at the window to check for light. Nothing. Just blackness outside. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and saw the time, 4:16 a.m. Luna, my shepherd mix, was sitting stiff on the edge of the bed, ears forward, eyes locked on the ceiling in the far corner near the closet. Her head was tilted just slightly, like she was trying to figure something out. I sat up and whispered her name, but she didn't move. I followed her gaze, and for maybe a second, maybe even less, I thought I saw something up there. Like a glow. A faint bluish-white shimmer right at the edge of the ceiling where the two walls met. It wasn't a light bulb kind of glow, more like the way light hits frost or oil. Just the suggestion of light, and then it was gone. Darkness again. I got up and turned the lamp on. Nothing. Ceiling was clear. I even grabbed a broom and tapped around up there like an idiot. No bugs, no leaks. Luna had stopped growling, but she was still staring, tail low and stiff. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just left the lamp on and lay there listening. No more noises, no more lights. But Luna stayed awake too. She eventually laid back down, but she didn't sleep. Every time I looked at her, her eyes were open and pointed at that same spot. The next morning felt weird. Not in any dramatic way, just off. My coffee tasted metallic, which might have just been in my head. My phone battery was dead. Not low, dead, even though I had it plugged in overnight. I checked the cable, checked the outlet. Everything worked when I tested it later. It charged fine that afternoon. That glow stuck with me. I've had floaters in my vision before, and I know what dreams feel like when they bleed into waking. This wasn't that. I was fully awake, and it wasn't in my eyes. It was external, in the air. I checked my smoke alarm too. No blinking lights, no reflections from anything. The rest of that week was quiet. Nothing unusual happened, but I felt uneasy every night. It was worse between 3 and 5 a.m., like my body was on high alert for something I couldn't name. Then Friday came, and something else happened. I was watching TV in the living room, some dumb comedy I wasn't even paying attention to, and Luna, who'd been sleeping next to the couch, suddenly stood up and walked to the hallway. Her nails clicked on the tile. I muted the TV and listened. She wasn't growling this time, just standing there, alert. After a few seconds, I heard this faint creaking sound. It came from the back of the house, the area near my bedroom. It wasn't floorboards shifting or pipes. I know those sounds. It was rhythmic, like something rocking gently. I don't have anything back there that would creak like that. I stood up and took a few steps toward the hall. Luna turned to look at me, then looked back toward the bedroom. Her tail was down again. I didn't go back there. I just stood with my hand on the wall, listening. The creaking faded after a minute or two. I told myself it was wind, even though there wasn't any wind that night. I slept on the couch. Saturday morning, I checked the backyard first thing. The security light was off, no signs of animals. But the porch camera, the one pointed toward the yard, had a corrupted file. That was the word it used. Corrupted. The 4 to 5 a.m. block was just gone. Every other hour before and after was fine. I didn't know what to make of it. I started wondering if maybe the camera had picked up something that messed with the file. That didn't even make sense, but it kept circling in my head. That night, I kept all the lights on. At 2:30 a.m., I sat in the bedroom with my laptop and just waited. I didn't want to fall asleep. Luna was on the floor beside me, breathing slow, relaxed. At 3:42 a.m., she stood up fast and looked at the same corner of the ceiling again. I stared with her, holding my breath, and there it was. That shimmer, that faint, swirling glow, just barely there in the corner. It didn't move, didn't flicker, it just hung there like a stain in the air, the size of a dinner plate. No sound, no smell, no temperature change. I lifted my phone to take a photo, but the screen went white. Not a flash, just pure white. No camera interface, nothing. I tapped the screen and the power button, but nothing worked until I held it down and forced a restart. When it came back on, the time jumped from 3:42 to 3:58. No photo, just gone. Luna hadn't moved the entire time. She wasn't growling, just staring like she was hypnotized. When the glow vanished, again, it didn't blink out, it just faded. She turned and walked out of the room. I followed her and didn't go back in there that night. The next day, I had the ceiling inspected. There's nothing there. No wiring, no insulation issues, no moisture. I even took apart the lamp, thinking maybe something in the bulb was throwing a weird reflection. Nothing. I've been sleeping in the guest room ever since. Nothing major has happened in a few weeks now, but sometimes when I walk past my bedroom door at night, I feel this buzzing. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure in my chest. A tiny vibration under the skin. It always fades as soon as I move away. Luna won't go in there anymore. I've tried tossing a toy in, calling her, even walking in myself to show her it's okay. She just stands in the hall, ears back, whining softly. I haven't seen the glow again, but I get the feeling it's not gone. Just waiting. I was sitting on the back porch around 8:15 on a Tuesday night, smoking a cigarette and listening to the crickets. It had been a warm day in early August, low 70s with almost no breeze. The sky was as clear as it gets out here in Western Oregon. No clouds, just stars spreading out like a sheet. I had my boots off and my feet up on the railing, just trying to relax after mowing the lawn and dealing with a stack of bills that had piled up on the kitchen counter. Luna, my pit lab mix, was lying at my feet, eyes half closed. I wasn't thinking about much until the air suddenly changed. It was weird. Like that moment before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops but without any thunderclouds. The breeze just stiffened, like someone closed a curtain on the air. Your ears feel it first, then your skin. That familiar subtle squeeze, even though the sky overhead was still pitch clear. Luna sat up and didn't growl, but she did stiffen. Ears forward, tail down but not tucked. I thought she heard something, but there was no sound. Quiet, like someone muted the world. Then the light showed up. Just above the treetops, maybe 30, 40 feet up, there was this circular glow. Dim, not bright like a spotlight or headlights, more like a shallow white ring, like a halo floating in the air. It wasn't a perfect circle, a little uneven, but definitely round, and it moved smoothly straight over the yard. I didn't hear anything, no hum, no buzz, not even a whisper of noise, just that light sliding over the cedar trees and across my yard. I can't say how fast it was going, not slow, but not fast either, just steady. The kind of movement you don't really notice at first because it's so quiet and smooth. I stood up, putting my cigarette down in the ashtray, and watched it move. It passed over the roofline of my neighbor's house, old two-story with that faded gray siding, and continued on, heading northwest. There were stars all around it, no dark patch or distortion in the sky. The glow just sort of passed through their space. Luna didn't follow it with her eyes, but she stayed watching, head turned after it, not blinking much. When it got over the trees and was halfway to the ridge beyond town, it faded. Not a blink or a vanishing. More like the light got thinner, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer. In less than 4 seconds, it was gone entirely. I don't know why, but my first thought was to clap my hands once, like that would confirm it wasn't a trick of the eye. It didn't do anything. No echo, no sound, just me in the yard holding my breath. I checked my phone right away. Time was 8:16 p.m. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated or mistaken something else for light, but the moment I looked down at the screen, Luna walked up to me and nudged my ankle with her nose, like she wanted to be acknowledged or maybe just wanted me to move. I asked her if she saw it, and she just blinked slow, then laid down again, ears still forward but not tense. That was odd too. Usually, if she's spooked, she growls or circles, but she didn't. I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and turned on the kitchen light. The house felt too warm, a little muggy, even though it had been cool late in the day. I didn't hear any strange sounds, but the quiet from outside hung in my ears like the room itself was muted. I checked the backyard camera after dinner. It's one of those cheap motion-activated things I put up last spring because I kept hearing noises at night. Nothing. No motion triggered around 8:15. I rewound the timeline, hit play at 15-second intervals. The last clip was at 8:02, then the next was at 9:01. Nothing in between. I checked the power logs on the camera. No outage, no resets. Just a solid hour where it didn't register any motion. Not even an animal. That part bothered me more than the light itself. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, watching the ceiling fan, listening for any sort of hum or vibration. Nothing came. Just silence. The next morning, I went out to the yard before work. The grass looked a bit trampled, like someone had walked through it from the neighbor's fence to the back corner near the woods. But when I looked closer, the blades were bent the wrong way. Not pressed down by footsteps, just leaning strangely as if something had brushed past them from above. I walked around in the foggy light before sunrise, checking for prints, broken branches, anything. Nothing that made sense. No footprints, no drag marks, no tree scars, just grass, bent awkwardly, and some leaves that had fallen in a circle near the fence, but not a perfect circle, just a subtle curve like wind had spun them, except there was no wind that morning. I tried talking to my neighbor Joe that afternoon. I asked if he saw anything weird in the sky. He just laughed and said the town's been quiet lately, just the usual stars and satellites. He hadn't noticed anything. His wife, Margie, didn't either. I went back to that part of the yard later that night, around 8 p.m., carrying a flashlight and Luna trailing at my heels. I scanned the trees, the fence line, the back edge of the property. The air was cooler than it had been the night before, and more still. The hum of cicadas filled the silence. I didn't hear anything like last night's pressure change. Then, right about 8:15, I felt it again, that subtle shift in the air, like something unseen pressed in my ears and chest for a heartbeat. Not loud, not sharp, just an odd sensation. I lifted my head. Nothing showed. No glow, no shape, no shifting lights, just quiet and stars. I walked back to the porch and sat down. Luna lay down beside me, eyes closed, tail relaxed. I watched the sky for a long time, letting the crickets sing and the wind stay absent. Eventually, I went inside. I didn't look up at the sky again before bed. I checked the backyard camera once more. Still nothing recorded from last night. No motion alerts, no weird glitches. Nothing. But every time I walk outside around 8:15 now, I notice the air first. That same stillness, like something is waiting just beyond what I can see. I stand there, cigarette in hand, ears open, hoping not to catch the sound or the light again. Not out of fear, exactly, just confusion and that quiet, creeping sense that something was once there and might still be watching. I woke up because I heard the little chirp from the home security app on my phone. It was 2:02 a.m. and the screen said, "Motion detected in backyard." I live in rural Boonville, up in the Arkansas Ozarks, not exactly a high crime area. but I keep a couple of cameras trained on the yard and driveway after someone stole my grill last summer. I didn't expect to see anything interesting at 2 a.m., much less this. I clicked the notification and watched the clip. It was almost pitch black in the yard, just shadows from the trees and the wooden fence. Then, for a split second, half a second really, the whole yard lit up, white, like someone had turned on a massive floodlight pointed straight down from the sky. There was no lightning, no sound on the clip, no thunder or thunderclap or crack or anything. Just that flash. The weirdest part was that there was no source in the frame. Not a drone, not headlights, nothing reflective that could have cast the light. Just the yard, bright as day for an instant, and then darkness again. The timestamp in the corner said 2147. I sat there trying to process it, replaying that tiny blip over and over. I looked out the bedroom window toward the backyard. No light, no glow anywhere. Just the normal silhouette of the fence and trees against a cloudy night sky. I figured maybe one of the critters kicked something into the frame and triggered the camera's motion sensor for just that flash. But that didn't make sense. Motion clips usually show whatever moved, even in the dark. This was just light with no apparent cause. I got up, put on socks and slides, and walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. Luna, my black lab mix, followed me close, nose down like she was tracking a scent. I checked the second camera, the one pointed near the back door. Nothing. No motion frame at 2:01. No light. Just normal darkness until 2:03 when the next motion clip triggered because the wind rattled the porch steps. I went into the backyard with a flashlight. The air was cool and humid like it always gets in early fall. Fog was lying low along the ground, thin and creeping. The ground was damp where the sprinkler system had run earlier that night. I scanned the yard and the trees. Everything was normal, nothing out of place, no trampled grass or disturbed soil. I even checked the grill area, which was where the previous break-in stuff happened. Nothing, not even footprints, just ordinary darkness and shadows. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white flash, like I was looking at it from the outside, not from the camera. In the morning, I showed the clip to my neighbor, Warren. He's an electrician by trade, used to CCTV and all that. He watched it with me in my living room the better part of breakfast. "That looks like a saturation clip," he said, pointing at the screen on my laptop. Camera sensors can do weird things with noise and bright spots. I asked him if a reflection or a passing car might have done it. He said no. There's no reflective surface in that yard that could produce that, and no light source off screen. Could be a sensor glitch, but half a second is odd. You don't usually get that clean global flaring from a random glitch. I nodded, but it didn't satisfy me. I knew what I saw, a flash of light, no lightning, no sound. It felt too real for a sensor error. That night, I left the porch lights on. At around 11:30 p.m., I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air was heavy and warm, like summer forgotten to quit. The crickets were loud, and a half moon hung low over the trees. I watched Luna sniff around the grass. She didn't bark, didn't flinch, just wandered, tail low, ears perked a bit. I noticed a flicker from the camera housing, a tiny green LED that blinked when it was recording. I looked up at the sky and thought I saw something, just beyond the tree line, a faint glow that didn't match any star. It wasn't a shape, not really, just this slight pale tint against the night. I blinked, and it was gone. I finished my trash chore and went back inside. That uneasy feeling in my chest stayed with me, like something had brushed past the edge of my awareness even without a sound. Later that night, around 1:17 a.m., I woke again. This time, my phone wasn't buzzing. I just woke up. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, just a dim red 1:17, and listened. The house was quiet. Even the old HVAC unit outside seemed silent. I reached for my phone out of habit and then realized the screen was glowing faintly on its own. I hadn't touched it, but the lock screen was lit up bright. I checked the time again. Same. It wasn't charging, nothing was going on, just lit. I turned it over and the screen went dark. I lay there for a long time, waiting. No noise, no lights, no notifications, just the quiet buzz of electric in the walls. Morning finally came. I checked the backyard camera again. There was another clip at 1:16 a.m., but this one was only half a second long, similar to the night before. I watched it and saw that same yard lit up, bright and white, but this time there was something subtle at the very edge of the frame, a slight shadow moving across the grass. It wasn't clear, more like a blur, just enough that I squinted and rewound it a few times. I showed that clip to Warren too. He just shrugged and said it might be noise from a low-light sensor reacting to nothing. But I didn't think it was just noise. There was something in that blur. Not a distinct shape, not a creature, not a person. Just movement that wasn't like the wind. A few nights later, I kept all the lights inside on and didn't check the cameras. I just tried to sleep through it. I woke at 3:02 a.m. to silence. I checked the porch light through my blinds. It was steady, same as before. No flash, no motion alert. It was peaceful. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I checked the footage. The camera by the fence logged motion at 3:01 a.m. And again, another half-second clip. Same bright white yard. No sound, nothing visible except that flood of light. No blur this time. Just the yard, bright as day, and then nothing. I replayed that split second dozens of times. I cropped it, I adjusted contrast, I looked for any hint of movement, any sign of what could have caused that light. Nothing reliable. I talked to a couple coworkers about it later in the week. One joked about a satellite reflection. Another suggested a power grid fluctuation. They all had ideas. None of them fit what was in the video. The weird thing is, the rest of the footage that night, the hours before and after, was ordinary. Nothing. No animals, no cars, no shifting lights among the trees, just darkness, like always. When I step outside at night now, I find myself looking up at the sky more than the yard. Not watching for flashes, not expecting anything, just checking the emptiness above. I stand there a little longer than I used to, breathe a little deeper, and then go back inside. But I check the cameras every morning, every single morning, and every day I play those half-second clips. Hundreds of frames stretched into a blink that makes the yard as bright as day. Nothing else shows in them yet, just the light and the quiet. It was early November, maybe the second week, and I was driving from my sister's place in Millersburg back to where I live in Marietta. It's about an hour and a half drive through mostly back roads and farmland. I left her house later than I meant to, closer to 11 p.m., and by the time I was out of town and into the unlit stretches, the fog had started to settle in. Not thick at first, but enough that I had to slow down. I've made that drive dozens of times, so I wasn't worried. I had music playing low and a big thermos of gas station coffee in the cup holder. My only real concern was deer, since they like to jump out on those back roads. But the farther I got into the hills, the heavier the fog got. Not just low to the ground, it started clinging to the trees, thick bands drifting across the road like smoke. Somewhere past a little town called Dresden, where the farms get sparse and the woods close in tight, my high beams stopped helping. They were just bouncing off the fog, so I dimmed them and crept along maybe 30 miles an hour, just trying to keep between the faded white lines. That's when I saw the headlights. At first I thought it was another car coming around a bend up ahead, maybe half a mile away. Two bright points of light, side by side, a little yellowish, except something was immediately off. They looked too high, like way too high, at least twice the height of any normal car or truck. They weren't blinding either, just suspended there, shining through the fog. I eased off the gas and watched them, expecting them to move, to get closer or shift as the other vehicle turned, but they just stayed in place. No motion, no glare, just fixed. I thought maybe it was a utility truck on a hillside or a combine or something, but the terrain there is pretty flat and mostly trees. And these lights were centered over the road, not off to the side. As I got closer, maybe a quarter mile out, the lights started to fade. Not flicker, just dim, like someone was slowly turning a dial. Within 5 or 6 seconds, they were completely gone. I reached the spot and there was nothing there. No car, no turnoff, no fence, no pole. Just road and fog. I slowed to a crawl and stuck my head slightly out the window. The air was dead quiet. I even killed the radio for a minute. No engine hums, no night sounds, just silence and fog. I drove on. About 10 minutes later, I passed a barn I always use as a landmark. The roof's half collapsed and there's this old grain silo behind it. I remember looking at it, noticing how weirdly still everything was. Normally there's some motion, trees swaying, a raccoon darting across the ditch, something, but it all felt frozen. That's when my car made this hiccup. Not a full stall, but a quick dip in power. The dash lights dimmed, and the engine sputtered like it had choked on air. Then it caught again and kept running. I tapped the gas, heart racing a little, and everything seemed fine. I looked in the rearview mirror. Way behind me, maybe a few hundred yards, those same two lights were back. But now they were low, road level, still spaced like headlights, but too far apart to be a car. And they weren't swaying or bouncing like a vehicle on a country road. They were dead steady, not getting closer, just holding their place in the distance. I don't know why, but it made my stomach flip. I kept driving, trying not to look back too much. Every time I did, the lights were still there. Same position, same distance. Not gaining, not falling back, just matching me. At some point, I hit a longer straightaway and decided to pull over. There's a gravel patch next to a field gate that I've used before. I figured I'd let whatever it was pass, see if it was some kind of farm vehicle with weird high beams. I pulled over and killed my lights, rolled the window down halfway. The lights behind me didn't move. They stayed where they were, hovering. Not even a hint of motion. I watched for maybe a full minute, not blinking much. Then they dimmed again, slowly, and vanished. I waited another couple minutes, engine still running. Nothing, just fog and dark. Eventually, I pulled back onto the road and kept going, a little faster now. By the time I got to the bridge outside Lowell, the fog started lifting. It thinned enough that I could see the stars again, and I felt this weird pressure in my chest ease up, like I'd been holding tension without realizing it. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat for a second before getting out. The sky was totally clear. My phone had no notifications, even though I'd had it on vibrate the whole drive. Then I noticed my trip odometer. I always reset it before long drives. I know that road well enough to know it's about 86 miles from my sister's to my house. It reads 64.3. I went back through the route in my head, thinking maybe I'd turned somewhere or taken a shorter path. But I hadn't. There's really only one good way to get back. I even checked Google Maps afterward, same distance as always. Somewhere along the way, I lost over 20 miles. No time was missing. I wasn't late getting home, but the car recorded less distance traveled than it should have. I've never figured that out. The next morning, I checked the car for issues, loose battery cable, wiring problems, anything that might explain the dash flicker or the trip meter. Everything looked fine. I asked a mechanic friend about it a week later. He said if the power dipped just right, it could reset some things temporarily, but it usually wouldn't affect the odometer. It hasn't happened again. But I don't drive that road at night anymore. Not alone. It happened last August, just outside of Bishop, California. I'd taken a solo trip up into the Sierras to camp for a couple days and get away from everything. I had a spot I liked about 2 miles up from Lake Sabrina, not too remote, but quiet enough that I wouldn't be bumping into other people constantly. No cell signal out there either, which was the point. I got in that afternoon, set up camp, and spent the evening walking along the ridge trail. It was hot during the day, but as soon as the sun dipped, the temperature dropped hard. By 9 p.m., I had a fire going, cooked some food, and climbed into my sleeping bag a little after 10. I couldn't sleep, not for any particular reason. It was just one of those nights where your brain doesn't shut up. So around midnight, I got up and walked out past the trees to this little rise where the view opened up over the basin. You could see all the way down toward the town lights in Bishop, a long, thin line of them way out on the flat. I sat on a boulder and looked up. Stars were incredible, crisp, tons of them, the kind of night sky you don't get unless you're hours from any city. The Milky Way cut across the sky clearly. I didn't have cell service, but I pulled out my phone anyway. I like taking long exposure shots of stars. I set it up on a small tripod and let it sit while I just watched. That's when I noticed something strange. There was this one bright star near the edge of the tree line, a little off from Orion's belt, kind of in that empty space below. I thought it might be Jupiter at first, real bright, not twinkling much. But after a minute or two, I realized it wasn't staying still. It was moving, not fast and not blinking like a plane, just sliding, smooth and slow, right to left. I remember watching it and thinking it had to be a satellite, but the movement wasn't steady. It paused halfway across the patch of sky, hovered there, then kept going, but in a new direction, angled upward. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds, just confused more than anything. I tried to film it, but my phone wouldn't focus. The entire area of sky where the object was just stayed blurry. Everything around it, the stars, the horizon, even the tops of the trees, was sharp. But that one spot stayed fuzzy no matter how I adjusted. Then the screen went black for half a second and came back. I thought the phone crashed, but it hadn't. It was just like it had blinked. The object was gone. I looked up with my eyes and saw it again. Farther west now, higher up, almost straight overhead. I didn't see it move. It was just suddenly there, like it jumped. Then it started to drift again, this time faster, and the light faded gradually until it was gone. I stayed out there another 10 minutes. My phone never focused properly on that part of the sky again, and I gave up trying. When I got back to my tent, I realized the fire had gone out completely. Not unusual, but I always pile some wood nearby before turning in. The pile was gone, completely scattered, like someone had kicked it apart. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I found something else that bothered me. I always set a little stack of rocks by the trail that leads down to the stream so I can find it in the dark. They were gone, not knocked over, just gone. No signs of them nearby, like they'd been moved. I was planning to stay 2 more nights, but I left that afternoon. The air felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Nothing dramatic happened. No figures in the woods, no missing time. Just the wrongness of it. Like something that didn't want to be seen had been seen for a moment. On the drive back to town, my phone suddenly got warm in my pocket, like uncomfortably hot. I pulled it out and saw the battery had dropped from 72% to 18% in maybe 10 minutes. I hadn't used it. No apps were open. I still have the blurry photo it took that night. Nothing special, just stars, trees, sky, and one patch that's smeared like someone took an eraser to it. It never focused right again after that, and I ended up replacing the phone a month later. I haven't been back to that ridge since. Not because I'm scared exactly, just something about it doesn't sit right. Like I wasn't supposed to notice what I saw, or it wasn't supposed to notice me. I was out on Greer's Ferry Lake, just me and the boat, around 10 o'clock at night. Early September, still warm enough in Arkansas to fish comfortably after dark. The air had that heavy, damp feel to it, not stormy, just still. No wind, no bugs buzzing in my ears for once, and barely a ripple across the surface. I usually fish alone. I prefer it that way. Quieter. Less explaining to do if I want to sit and do nothing for an hour. My name's Dennis. Been fishing this lake since I was a kid. My dad had a little John boat he used to take me out in, and now I've got a flat-bottom tracker with a trolling motor and a little depth finder. Nothing fancy. It's all I need. That night, I was set up on the south end near a cove past the bluffs. No one really goes out that far after dark. There aren't any campsites nearby, and most of the serious night fishermen stay closer to the boat ramp. I liked the isolation. I anchored in maybe 15 feet of water, turned the overhead light off to avoid bugs, and just sat there with my line in the water and a cold Gatorade in hand. No music. No music. No phone. Just the quiet slap of water against the hull and the occasional hoot from an owl in the distance. I don't know how long I was sitting there. Could have been an hour, could have been 2. I wasn't catching anything. That didn't bother me. The point wasn't really the fish that night. At some point I started noticing the water under me looked off. Not visibly moving or bubbling or anything, but just slightly different. Like the color had shifted. I thought maybe clouds had moved across the moon and changed the way the light hit it. But when I looked up, I saw the sky was still mostly clear. Moon was bright, almost full, with just a few wisps of cloud hanging low, low to the west. I leaned forward, peering over the edge of the boat. That's when I saw it. A faint glow directly under me. Not a reflection, not the moon. It wasn't shimmering like light off the surface. It was beneath it. Maybe 4 or 5 feet down, like moonlight had somehow gotten trapped under the water. It wasn't flickering, and it didn't have a clear source. It was just there, glowing softly, pale blue, maybe a little silvery. I figured it had to be some kind of bioluminescence, maybe a patch of algae or something stirred up from the bottom. But it was too consistent, too defined. It wasn't drifting aimlessly. It was shaped not into something I could name, not a fish or object, but shaped like a soft oval, like a slow pulse of light. Then it started moving, not fast, not in a hurry, just sliding away from the boat, smooth and deliberate. It didn't leave a trail or ripple. The surface of the lake stayed perfectly calm, even my bobber didn't twitch. But I could see it passing under the water, glowing gently, slipping off toward deeper water. I stood up, slowly, trying not to rock the boat. I watched it go. It moved maybe 15 feet, paused, and then kept going, fading as it went. Eventually it disappeared into the darker part of the lake where the moonlight didn't reach. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute, maybe two. I didn't move for a while after that. I just stood there holding my fishing rod in one hand, the other resting on the edge of the boat. I kept looking at the water like it might come back. Eventually I sat down, reeled in the line, checked my phone out of habit even though I had no signal out there, no notifications, nothing new. That's when I noticed the depth finder had shut off. I thought maybe the battery died, but the trolling motor still worked, and they run off the same power supply. I switched it off and on again. Nothing. No lights, no beeping, just dead. I decided that was enough fishing for the night. I pulled anchor and started the motor, keeping it slow as I made my way back toward the ramp. I stayed close to the shoreline, which I normally don't bother with, but I felt better being near something solid. On the way back, maybe 10 minutes into the ride, I glanced over my shoulder and saw what I thought was another boat's light back in the direction I'd come from. But it wasn't bobbing like a boat light should. It was hovering, just above the waterline. Pale, steady, and absolutely silent, I stopped the motor and cut the lights, let myself drift. It didn't move, just hung there, maybe a foot above the lake, maybe two. Hard to tell from that distance. Could have been 20 yards away, could have been more, but it was there. Then it slowly dipped down, touched the surface, and vanished. Not into the water, into nothing. Like it had never been there. I waited. Nothing. I turned the motor back on and made it the rest of the way to the ramp without stopping. When I got the boat back on the trailer and started heading home, I turned on the radio to kill the silence. The display on the dash read 12:44 a.m., but the trip back hadn't taken that long. I double-checked my watch. It said 12:01. My phone said 12:01. The truck's clock was the only one that said otherwise. And then, just as I was pulling into my driveway, it reset to 12:01, right in front of me. Just blinked off and came back. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind kept replaying the moment that glow slid under my boat and how the water never moved. I didn't go back out to that cove for a while. And when I finally did, a couple weeks later, I brought my friend Tyler with me. Just in case. I didn't tell him why. I just said the fish were biting better down there. They weren't. But I didn't care. I wasn't really there for the fishing that time either. It started around 2 a.m. I wasn't asleep yet. I'd been up late playing a game on my laptop, earbuds in, lights off. I live in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town in Oregon. Real slow place. My house is older, one story, sits on a decent-sized lot backed up against a tree line. The nearest neighbor is maybe 100 yards away. I only noticed the sound because I'd taken my earbuds out for a second to check my phone battery. At first, I thought it was just the fridge cycling on. A low, steady whirring sound, mechanical but smooth. It wasn't coming from inside, though. It was outside, and it was above the house. That's what threw me. It was so faint I probably wouldn't have picked it up during the day, but at that hour, with everything dead quiet, it stood out. I stood in the middle of my living room, trying to figure out if it was a plane or maybe a neighbor's drone. But it didn't sound like either. There was no pulse or rise and fall, just this weird, almost artificial hum. Not loud, just present. I stepped outside onto the back porch. It was cold out, not freezing, but enough that I noticed. Clear night, the sky was full of stars. No clouds, no moon. I stood there waiting for the sound to change. It didn't. That's when I noticed the sky looked wrong. Not all of it, just a patch of stars directly above the house. The stars were visible, but they looked fuzzy, like I was seeing them through water or heat waves. I moved a few feet to the left, toward the edge of the porch, and the stars looked normal again. I moved back, and the distortion returned. It wasn't my eyes. I wear glasses, good prescription, and I even took them off to be sure. Same result. One spot in the sky where the stars didn't quite sit right. I stared at it, trying to focus. That mechanical hum was still going, still soft, but now I realized it was centered over that exact same spot. My first thought was that something was up there, something invisible maybe, and it was messing with how the light was passing through. I walked down into the backyard, not taking my eyes off that spot. As I moved, the distortion moved with me. Not in the sky, but in my angle. Like I was getting closer to the edge of whatever it was. The stars kept their shape outside the center, but right in that patch, they shimmered. Then, very slowly, the sound started to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. The same way a fan winds down when you unplug it, that kind of mechanical deceleration. And as the sound faded, so did the shimmer. The stars cleared up. The air felt lighter. It's hard to describe, but it's like pressure I hadn't noticed was suddenly gone. I stood there for a while, just looking up, wondering if anything would come back, but it didn't. When I went back inside, my phone's screen wouldn't turn on. Not dead, just black. I held down the power button, but nothing happened. I plugged it into the charger, and it vibrated once, but didn't boot. It stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, then randomly came back on like nothing had happened. No restart screen. Just lit up to my home screen like I'd never turned it off. I checked the time, 2:24 a.m. I opened the front camera out of curiosity and aimed it at the ceiling. I don't know why I did that. Maybe just to see if anything weird would show up. Nothing did. The only other thing that happened that night was the porch light. It's motion activated. I didn't turn it on when I went outside earlier, but around 4 a.m. after I'd gone back to bed, it clicked on by itself. I know because I saw the glow under the curtains. No movement. Nothing on the camera footage. But the light stayed on for the full cycle, like something had passed by slow enough to keep it triggered for 30 seconds. I didn't go check. The next day I looked up local weather data and flight paths. No scheduled aircraft were overhead at that time. No wind. No atmospheric conditions that would explain the shimmering. And the house power had stayed on the whole time. No flickers, no resets. Just the phone acting strange and the weird distortion above the roof. I've stayed up a few nights since then, just watching the sky. I haven't heard the whirring again. But I did see that patch of stars flicker once a few weeks later, just for a second, like something passed in front of them, something clear or almost clear, but it didn't stick around. I woke up feeling hot. Not sweaty, just like the air itself was warmer than it should have been. I don't usually sleep with the door shut, but that night I had. I remember because the latch had stuck earlier and I had to yank it to get it to close. So when I opened the door and walked out into the hallway, I noticed the temperature change immediately. The rest of the house was cool. Not cold, just normal for early winter in Oregon. I went to the thermostat just to check. It read 67, same as always. Nothing was running, no heater, no vents blowing. I stood there for a second, rubbing the back of my neck, then padded back into the bedroom. Still warm. Not humid, not dry, just weirdly, noticeably warm. I looked at the window. My bed is right under it, and the blinds were pulled up halfway. Outside, the backyard was quiet and still, no wind, no sound. But the air above the grass looked off, wavy, like the shimmer you see above asphalt in the summer. Heat distortion, but just in one spot, maybe 10 feet out from the window, a wide patch of it hovering a foot or two off the ground. I pulled the blinds up higher and leaned closer. My window doesn't have a screen, just an old wood frame and a pane that sticks sometimes. I didn't open it. I just stood there watching the distortion. It wasn't moving. It just hung there almost perfectly still, and it was dead quiet. No bugs, no wind, no night sounds at all. I live in the suburbs, so there's always some kind of distant hum. Traffic, a neighbor's TV, something. But it was like someone hit mute. I stood there for maybe a full minute. Then I grabbed my phone and tried to take a video. As soon as I lifted it, the phone screen glitched. Not a freeze, more like static fuzz, like the screen was struggling to focus or display anything at all. The camera app crashed twice. The third time, the image loaded, but everything looked a few seconds behind, like it was buffering real life. I turned the camera to myself to test it, and that was fine. But when I aimed it at the window again, it went black. just a black screen with the faint edge of my windowsill at the bottom. I backed away a little and watched with just my eyes again. The shimmer was still there. It hadn't moved at all. I looked up, trying to see if there was anything above it, but the sky was clear. Stars were visible. No clouds, no planes, nothing. I'm not near any airports. I stood there a little longer, kind of frozen, not sure what I was even waiting for. Then the bedroom light flickered. Just once, a quick dim and return. But I don't sleep with the light on. I hadn't turned it on. I looked over, the switch was still down. The light had just blinked by itself. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep by my dresser and stepped back into the hallway. I stood there for a second, not really wanting to go outside, but not wanting to stay in that room either. I ended up walking into the kitchen, turning on all the lights as I went. Everything seemed normal there. Fridge hum, clock blinking 3:28 a.m. I hadn't noticed the time before. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, trying to think if maybe it was just one of those strange light things. Reflections, dew, maybe even some kind of power line distortion I didn't understand, I don't know. I looked out the sliding glass door that leads to the yard. The shimmer was still there, same spot. I turned off the kitchen light so I could see more clearly through the glass. As soon as I did, my motion detector light on the garage turned on, but nothing was moving out there. It lit up the side of the yard, casting a long shadow over the shimmered area, and for a second I thought I saw something inside it. Not clearly, not even a shape, just a darker section within the distortion that blinked out the grass behind it like something was standing there. I don't think I moved for at least 5 minutes. Eventually the garage light timed out and clicked off, and that's when I noticed the warmth again. The kitchen was heating up, not quickly, but enough to feel. I checked the thermostat again, still said 67, no vents running. I opened the sliding door just a crack. Cold air hit my face immediately, but only for about a second. Then the air right outside felt warm too, like the heat was leaking out from that spot and creeping toward the house. I shut the door and locked it again. Around 4 a.m., the shimmer disappeared. It didn't fade out. It just sort of blinked away, like flipping off a switch. The temperature in the bedroom dropped right after that, back to normal. My phone started working like nothing had happened. I checked the camera roll. No footage had saved, not even the failed attempts. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling, waiting for the light to flicker again. It never did. By morning, the yard looked totally normal. No burns, no marks, no footprints. Just frost on the grass like nothing had ever been warm. I was hiking alone near Mount Eldon, just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, late last fall. It was something I'd been doing more of, solo hikes after work to get away from everything. I lived in a small apartment downtown and worked remote for a software company, so getting outside in the evenings felt like the only way I could stay sane. That day had been warm for October, mid-60s, with clear skies. It was a dry heat that stuck around through dusk, the kind that makes the air feel bigger somehow. I'd taken the Fat Man's Loop trail, but branched off at one of the unmarked footpaths that lead a little higher up the slope. The sun had just gone down, and I was planning to stay long enough to catch some stars before heading back. I had a small flashlight in my jacket and one of those trail map apps on my phone that worked offline. I found a little clearing near a pile of volcanic rock, flat enough to sit on, and dropped my pack. The light was fading fast, but it wasn't completely dark yet. You know that in-between time when everything goes kind of gray and quiet? That's where I was. I pulled out my phone just to see how much time I had until full dark. The screen lit up fine, but the compass on the map app was spinning. I'd used the same app 100 times before. Usually it orients almost instantly, but this time the compass needle just kept turning in slow, perfect circles. North would settle for half a second, then it would jump and keep rotating. At first, I thought maybe I was standing too close to something metal, but there wasn't anything around me. Just dirt, rock, and a few scattered pine trees. I stood still and held the phone out away from me, trying to recalibrate it. That's when I noticed something overhead. There was a small point of light in the sky. Not bright like a star, more like a glint or reflection. It looked almost stationary at first, but when I focused on it, I realized it was moving. Not across the sky, but in a slow, tight circle. Perfectly round, tight enough that you wouldn't notice it if you weren't staring right at it. It didn't blink or fade, it just glided in that same circular path over and over, silent, steady. I looked around. The trail below was empty. No distant flashlights, no headlamps, no plane sounds, no wind. Total stillness, and that weirdly smooth movement overhead like it was being drawn by a compass itself. I thought maybe it was a drone. That seemed like the most logical guess. But I've seen drones and they don't move like that. They hum or buzz or wobble a little. This thing was completely silent, and it wasn't blinking red or green like most consumer drones. It was just that soft white point, circling. I tried taking a video with my phone, but as soon as I pointed it up, the camera went out of focus. Total blur. I tapped the screen, adjusted the settings, even tried switching apps. Nothing. Every time I aimed it at the sky, the image warped like a heat haze. The compass was still spinning. I went into the phone's sensor settings, and even the gyroscope reading was bouncing slightly, like it couldn't lock into position. I stood there for a few more minutes, like holding perfectly still. That light didn't stop circling, it didn't move away, it didn't fade, just kept going around and around in the exact same spot. Then all at once, it stopped. Not like it slowed down or drifted off, it just paused mid-circle and hung there, completely still. I froze. My hands were cold now and the hairs on my neck were standing up. I don't usually spook easy, but something about the way that light just watched, I guess. It felt like it was watching. I didn't move, didn't blink. The clearing around me felt wrong, like it was waiting for something too. After maybe 10 seconds, the point of light zipped off. Not in an arc, not gradually, just gone. Like it stretched into a streak for a split second, then disappeared into the sky. The compass on my phone stopped spinning. It settled immediately. North locked in. The maps snapped back into place. The gyroscope readings flattened. Everything on the phone was normal again. I didn't even get an alert or anything. It just reset. I didn't stay to watch the stars after that. I headed straight back to the main trail. I had my flashlight out, but I only used it for part of the way. Once I was under the thicker trees, it felt better to walk in the dark, less exposed somehow. About halfway down, I passed a couple coming up. I asked if they'd seen any drones or anything unusual in the sky. They said no, just stars. When I got back to my car, I sat inside for a while before turning the engine on. The compass in the dashboard showed north as due west for about 3 seconds, then corrected itself. I remember that detail because I looked at it, then turned my head toward the actual mountains and thought, that's not right. And then it fixed itself like nothing had happened. The drive home was quiet. I didn't try to play music. Didn't call anyone. I didn't even check the video I'd tried to take until the next morning. It was just static, a 10-second clip of gray fuzz. No audio, no image. Nothing else on my phone had been affected. I haven't done a solo hike up Eldon since. I've gone out with friends, but I don't tell them the real reason I avoid that side of the mountain. It's not that I'm scared, exactly. It's more like I don't want to bring whatever that was back with me. It was a Tuesday night, or technically early Wednesday morning, sometime last April. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, which wasn't unusual. I do that a lot when I tell myself I'm just going to rest my eyes after dinner. The TV was still on, volume low, playing reruns of some home renovation show. I woke up kind of abruptly, not from a dream or anything. It was just that sudden awareness where your body knows something's different. The apartment was quiet. No cars outside, no hum from the fridge, nothing. That stuck out because I live near a freeway in West Sacramento. There's always something buzzing or humming or passing by, but it was just still. I rubbed my face, sat up a bit, and realized the blinds behind me were glowing. Not like sunlight, not like headlights either. It was faint but steady, pale, kind of bluish white, like the color of a phone screen turned way down in a dark room. It wasn't bright enough to light up the whole place, but enough that the slats of the blinds were clearly outlined on the opposite wall, even though it was well past midnight. I assumed at first it was just a weird passing car with bright LEDs, maybe someone parked with their brights pointed at the building. I live on the second floor though, so that didn't really add up. I turned and looked toward the window, but something weird happened when I tried to focus through the slats. My eyes wouldn't adjust. The glow faded slowly, not like something moved away, but like the light had never really been there at all. It just sort of thinned out until I was left staring at normal darkness. But my eyes kept straining, like they were coming off a camera flash, except I hadn't seen anything directly. My pupils felt slow to respond. Everything in the apartment looked oddly dim, even with the TV still on. I got up and pulled the blinds open all the way. The sky was completely clear. No clouds, no haze, nothing blocking the stars. But even though I could see the stars, something felt wrong about them. They weren't as sharp as usual, like I was looking through a layer of distortion, even though my window was clean. I leaned closer and opened the window itself just to be sure. The air was cool, normal, nothing smelled off. That's when I noticed the neighbors' wind chimes weren't moving. They hang from a little awning on the building across the lot, and normally they're always tinkling, even just a little. But they were dead still, like the air wasn't moving at all. I stuck my head out farther to get a look around the complex. Everything was dark. Not a single porch light on, not even the usual dull yellow from the laundry room window downstairs. Just darkness and this weird, faint, shimmering quality in the air. Almost like heat waves, but it was maybe 53 degrees out. Then I saw the porch light across from me blink once. Fast, like a camera flash, and then nothing. Just a quick pulse. No sound with it. I closed the window and walked through the apartment, turning on a couple lights. They came on, but they looked off, like they were dimmer than usual or tinted slightly. I opened the fridge just to check, and even the light in there seemed strange. Not burnt out, just weaker somehow. I checked my phone. It was on, battery around 60%. No alerts, no missed calls. I opened the camera and tried pointing it out the window. The screen stayed black, even though I was clearly pointing it at a lit-up street. I turned it to face inside, and it worked fine. The second I pointed it out again, just black. Then it froze. Not the whole phone, just the camera app. The button stopped responding. The image was stuck. I tried to close it and open it again. Same result. I shut the phone off and just stood in the middle of the living room. The silence was thick now. Not just no noise. It felt like there should be noise, but something was suppressing it, like being underwater. About a minute later, I heard something very faint. A low, pulsing hum. Not loud, not even consistent. Just there, like it was happening just at the edge of hearing. I pressed my ear to the wall to see if it was coming from the neighbor's apartment, but it didn't change. It didn't get louder or shift direction. It was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I turned off all the lights again. I don't really know why. I think I felt exposed. Even though my blinds were closed again, I didn't want any light coming out. I sat back down on the couch and tried to focus on the TV, but the screen looked off too. The colors were muted, and the sound had a slight delay, like it was running half a second behind. Suddenly, every hair on my arm stood up. You know that feeling when someone walks into a room behind you, even if they're completely silent? That was what it felt like, except it wasn't inside the apartment. It was just outside the window. No footsteps, no shadows, just the unmistakable sense that something was there, just beyond the glass. I didn't look right away. I stayed completely still. My heart was going nuts, and I was trying to convince myself it was nothing. A raccoon, a drunk neighbor, a trick of the light. Then I heard the softest thud, like a single footstep. Not on the balcony, on the wall, as if something had landed lightly on the outside and pressed against it. I finally turned my head and looked. There was nothing, no movement, no shadow, just the same dark street and distant lights of the highway beyond. But again, it took my eyes longer than it should have to adjust, like the sky was darker than it had any right to be. The hum came back, a little stronger now, and this time, I felt it in my chest, like a deep bass note. Not painful, but unnerving. It only lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded out like it had been turned off. Immediately after, the porch lights across the complex flicked on all at once. Every single one. Then, within 3 seconds, they turned off again. Just one pulse of artificial daylight, then gone. My phone restarted by itself. The logo came up. It stayed on that screen for a while, longer than usual. When it finally booted up, it asked me to re-enter my passcode instead of using my fingerprint. My home screen was intact. No apps missing, no weird messages. But the clock was wrong. It said 3:22 a.m. That didn't make sense. I'd woken up just after 2:50. I was sure of it. I hadn't been sitting there for 30 minutes. Maybe 10, tops. Everything felt like it had clicked back into place. The sounds outside returned gradually. The distant traffic, a dog barking 2 blocks over, the wind chimes. Even the fridge motor kicked in again. I sat there until sunrise, not really thinking, just watching the sky. It looked normal by then. Pale blue creeping in from the east. No distortion, no glow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed over, or maybe stayed just long enough to notice me noticing it. It was just after 9 p.m. Early September, still warm out, but not uncomfortably so. I was walking my dog, a mutt named Jasper, around the block like I do every night. We live in a small neighborhood outside Asheville. Quiet. Quiet. Just a few dozen houses on a loop with no outlet. Most of the homes have big yards, old porches, tall trees. I'd been on the same loop 100 times, usually with earbuds in, but that night I left them at home. Jasper was sniffing every patch of grass like it was the most important thing in the world, and I was just zoning out watching him tug the leash back and forth. The crickets and tree frogs were loud, not in an annoying way, just the usual constant noise you stop noticing after a while. We were maybe 3/4 around the loop when I noticed the quiet. It wasn't like a slow fade, it just stopped. 1 second, the background noise was there, and the next it was gone. Every bug, every frog, even the breeze in the trees, just gone. Dead silent. I actually stopped walking because it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Jasper stopped too, ears up, tail frozen mid-wag. He looked back at me like he was waiting for a cue, and I realized I was holding my breath. I started to turn around, maybe to go home, maybe just to check behind me, and that's when I saw the light. At the far end of the street, maybe 6 houses down, like there was a soft white glow. Not blinding, not headlights. It was lower to the ground than a streetlight and didn't cast shadows. It was just there. Like someone had painted a faint circle of light at the end of the road. At first I thought it was someone's porch light or a motion sensor, but the shape was off. It wasn't attached to anything, and it didn't blink or flicker. It hovered maybe 10 feet off the ground, almost exactly in the center of the street, perfectly still. I squinted, trying to figure out if it was some trick with fog or mist, but the air was totally clear. I reached down and touched Jasper's collar, more for my own comfort than his. He was staring at it too, not growling or barking, just locked in place, like he wasn't sure if we were in danger or not. We stood there for probably 20 seconds. Then the light moved. It didn't blink out or shoot off. It just started rising, straight up, slow and smooth, like a balloon. But it wasn't bobbing or wavering. It moved like it was on a rail, completely steady. And once it hit a certain height, maybe just above the tree line, it vanished. Not behind something, not out of sight. It just disappeared. The second it was gone, the sound came back. All at once. Crickets, frogs, the breeze, like flipping a switch. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stood there with Jasper for another full minute before turning around and walking home. We didn't finish the loop. I didn't feel scared exactly, just weird, off balance, like my brain hadn't caught up yet. Back at the house, I checked the time, 9:18 p.m. We'd only been out maybe 20 minutes. I poured some water for Jasper and sat on the couch, trying to think of any normal explanation for what I'd seen. I even pulled up Google Maps to see if maybe there was a utility pole or something I hadn't noticed before. There wasn't. Later that night, after Jasper had fallen asleep at the foot of the bed, I tried to replay the moment in my head. The glow had no source, no shadows. The way it moved was too perfect. And that sudden silence, that was the part that really stuck with me. It wasn't just quiet, it was like the world paused. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Not because I thought they'd laugh or anything, but because I wasn't even sure how to describe it. Even now, it just feels like a glitch. Something out of sync with the rest of the world for a few minutes. I still walk Jasper every night, and I've passed that same spot dozens of times since. Nothing strange has happened again, but I don't wear earbuds anymore. I like being able to hear everything, just in case. It happened last October out on Highway 2 in Washington, just east of Gold Bar. I was heading back from visiting my sister in Leavenworth. She was in the hospital for a couple of days, nothing life-threatening, just complications from a surgery. I stayed longer than I planned, so I ended up driving home late, around 10:30 p.m. when I left. The road's mostly two-lane through that stretch. Trees on both sides, big evergreens that crowd up against the shoulders. No real towns between there and Monroe, just a few gas stations and some scattered cabins if you know where to look. I was maybe 40 minutes into the drive. It was dry and cold, sky clear, not much traffic. I was sipping coffee from a gas station cup, cruising steady around 55. No music, just the low hum of the tires on the pavement. Then I noticed something weird in the passenger side window. Not in the mirror. This was in the actual glass, like a reflection from the inside. There was this soft, round light, pale blue or white, kind of like the color of a computer screen in the dark. It wasn't bright enough to light up the cab or anything, but it was clearly there, just hovering near the edge of the glass. And the thing was, there was nothing behind me that could have made it. The road had been empty for miles. No cars in front, none behind. I even glanced at the rear view and confirmed it. Totally dark. The tree line on both sides was too close to reflect anything, and there weren't any buildings out there. So I turned my head. Just a quick look behind, over my shoulder. Nothing. No light source, no sign of movement, just darkness. But when I looked back at the window, the reflection was still there. That stopped me cold. I tapped the brakes, not hard, just enough to slow down a little, and stared straight into the glass. The light hadn't moved. It looked like it was hanging just behind the car, maybe 4 or 5 feet up and off to the right, but I couldn't see it outside. Only in the reflection. That really messed with my head. I rolled the window down. Cold air came in. The reflection vanished. Rolled it back up. Nothing. It didn't come back. I kept driving. Heart was picking up a bit, but I didn't want to admit I was spooked. Figured maybe some odd glare from my phone screen or the instrument panel, even though I'd had both dimmed. A few minutes later, I passed under a little bridge, one of those single-lane logging access things. After that, the trees opened up a bit on the left side, and I glanced out over the road shoulder. And I swear I saw something there. Not directly, but out of the corner of my eye, just above the tree line. It looked like a shape against the stars, not blocking them out exactly, more like bending them. Like the way heat shimmers over pavement. There was no sound, no movement, just this faint distortion in the sky. I stared at it for a couple seconds, trying to decide if it was even real. Then, it was gone. Just like that. About 10 miles later, I pulled off at a turnout to collect myself. Checked my phone, had a couple texts from my sister's husband, time-stamped about 20 minutes ago. I didn't remember the phone buzzing or lighting up. What's weird is, when I checked the messages, the signal was gone. 0 bars. I tried refreshing a weather app just to check. It spun for a second and froze. I got out of the car, just needing some air, and leaned on the hood. The forest around me was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, no engine noise from the road. Not even the usual high-up hum from the power lines that run through that area. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Then I heard it. This faint whirring sound. Mechanical, kind of soft. Not quite like a drone and not quite like a motor. It didn't come from one direction. It felt like it was above, somewhere high, but spread out, like it was part of the air itself. It lasted about 10 seconds, then faded out. I looked up, trying to spot anything in the sky, but there was nothing, just stars, perfectly clear. When I got back in the car, I noticed the dashboard clock was blinking. That was the first time I got genuinely uneasy. I hadn't turned the car off. My headlights were still on, but the clock was blinking like the battery had reset. Same with the radio. It had dumped my presets. Everything was back to default. I turned the ignition off, then on again. The car started fine, but now the clock said 12. It had been around 11 when I stopped. I checked my phone again. It said 11:42, which didn't make sense. I hadn't been sitting there for over 40 minutes. There's no way. I got back on the road, going faster than before. Made it to Monroe in about 20 minutes, pulled into a Shell station, and just sat there under the lights for a while. I didn't get out. Didn't buy anything. Just sat, letting the normalcy soak back in. Eventually, I drove the rest of the way home. Nothing else happened. Next morning, I checked the car's system again. Presets were gone. Bluetooth settings wiped, like it had never been paired with my phone. The strangest part, though, my rear passenger window, there was a faint smudge on the outside glass. Perfectly circular, maybe the size of a grapefruit. Not dirt, not a handprint. More like a residue, barely visible unless you caught it in the right light. I cleaned it off and didn't say anything to anyone. I don't know what that was. I've that drive dozens of times, both directions. Never had anything like that happen before or since. But sometimes when I'm out there again, I'll glance at the windows a little more than usual, just to check. It was late March, and I was walking home from Evan's place. We'd been watching some playoff game I didn't really care about, just hanging out. He lives about 6 blocks from me, and it's a quiet enough neighborhood that I usually just walk back even if it's late. That night it was close to 1 a.m., cold but not freezing, and dead quiet, except for some distant traffic from the freeway. I was halfway down Ashby Lane, right by the park where the sidewalk cuts between a line of pine trees and a little drainage ditch. No one else around, not even cars. I had my hands stuffed in my jacket pockets, head down, not thinking about much. Then all of a sudden, I got this, I don't know, pull. Not a noise or a flash or anything obvious, just this weird sensation like a hand nudging under my chin, making me look up. I stopped walking without even realizing it. And right then, just as my eyes lifted past the rooftops, I saw a light in the sky. It was dim, like maybe the brightness of a distant star, but closer, way closer. I knew it wasn't a plane or a helicopter because it wasn't blinking or moving. It was just there, frozen midair, almost directly above the street, maybe a few hundred feet up. It hadn't been there a second before. As soon as I made eye contact with it, it stopped. I mean, literally stopped, like it had been gliding or drifting and then froze instantly, the way a cursor snaps to a grid. It hovered perfectly still for what felt like a long time, but was probably just 5 or 6 seconds. Then it started drifting again, diagonally, like a feather on a string, except with purpose. It wasn't random, just smooth. It didn't blink, didn't hum, didn't make any sound at all. The air was totally still. I stayed rooted there, following it with my eyes as it moved across the sky, sliding out toward the eastern edge of the neighborhood. It passed over the park, over the elementary school, past the trees, and then just faded out. Like not zipped away or blinked off, just slowly dimmed until it wasn't there anymore. I didn't move for a good 30 seconds after that. My ears were ringing, but not from a sound. It was like the pressure in the air had shifted while the thing was there, and when it was gone, everything snapped back to normal. I finally got my legs working and started walking again, a little faster this time. I pulled my phone out to check the time and saw the screen flicker. Not fully on or off, just this quick pulse of static like an old TV. It only lasted half a second. After that, everything seemed fine, but I noticed the battery percentage had dropped from 72% to 58% in just a couple minutes. I turned down Sycamore, 2 blocks from my place, and kept glancing up, half expecting the light to come back. That's when I saw someone standing on the edge of their lawn, motionless, just standing there, facing the sky. I slowed down. It was a man, maybe mid-50s, bald in a zip-up hoodie and pajama pants. He wasn't holding a phone or anything. He didn't even seem to notice me. He just stood there, staring upward, eyes wide. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything in the sky. Just stars. I hesitated for a second, then said, "You okay, man?" He didn't answer, didn't even blink. After a few more steps, I looked back and he was gone. Not like he'd turned around and walked away. I mean, gone. The lawn was empty, the porch light still on, door closed. I hadn't heard a door shut. I didn't hear footsteps. Just gone. I made it home and locked the door behind me, which I never usually do. I pulled all the blinds closed too. Sat on the edge of the bed for a while, the lock still wearing my jacket, and opened the weather app on my phone to see the wind speeds and cloud cover for earlier in the night. Everything was normal. I tried to sleep, but kept replaying that frozen moment in my head, the way the light stopped when I looked at it, like it had been waiting for me. Around 3:20 a.m., I finally drifted off. My dreams were weird, silent and bright, but I couldn't remember any of them clearly the next morning. When I woke up, the only unusual thing was that my phone's compass kept spinning slowly in one direction whenever I opened it. Not jerking around like when you're inside, just this steady rotation that didn't match where I was facing. It stopped doing that later in the day. I didn't tell Evan. I didn't tell anybody. There's nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like I imagined it or dreamed it or saw a drone. But I've seen drones. I've seen satellites, planes, weather balloons, all of it. None of them behave like that light did. None of them wait for you to notice them. We lost power around 9:45 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was heating up leftovers and had just opened the microwave when everything clicked off. Microwave, fridge hum, ceiling fan, all of it. I live in a suburb outside Knoxville. Not rural, but not fully built up either. Houses are spaced out just enough to give everyone a bit of yard and a sense of privacy. The kind of neighborhood where most people wave but don't really talk. I rent a little 2-bedroom at the end of a cul-de-sac. Nothing fancy. That night was cold, mid-February, but not snowing. Just damp and still, one of those nights where you can see your breath but the air feels heavier than it should. There was no wind. Everything was quiet in that muffled winter way. I stepped out onto the porch with my flashlight to see if anyone else had lost power. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no TVs flickering behind windows, no street lamps. Even the neighbors across the cul-de-sac, the Arlens, who always have their Christmas lights up way past January, were dark. I wasn't worried at first. Stuff like this happens a couple times a year, usually back on in an hour or two. I went back inside, lit a couple candles, and texted my buddy Nate, who lives on the other side of the neighborhood. His power was out too. I sat on the couch with my hoodie pulled tight and scrolled my phone until the battery got low. Maybe 20 minutes later, I looked out the window again. Just killing time, I guess. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright. You wouldn't notice it unless you were really looking. But one house, about 4 down and across the street, had a faint light inside. I'm not even sure I'd call it light exactly. More like the kind of glow you see from a turned-off TV that's still plugged in, that low residual hum of a screen. It came from the whole house, though. Not just one window. The front-facing side sort of pulsed? Not visibly. I mean, the light didn't brighten or dim, but it felt like it had a rhythm, like it was breathing. I stood there staring through my front window, trying to figure out if they had a generator. But if they did, I didn't hear anything. No hum, no vibration. The rest of the block was dead quiet. After a couple minutes of watching, I slipped my boots on and walked out to the edge of my driveway. Everything else was pitch black. Trees, sidewalks, cars, all swallowed by darkness, except that one house still glowing faintly. It belonged to an older guy named Dennis. Lived alone, maybe late 60s. We'd only spoken twice, once when his dog got loose and once when I helped him shovel his driveway last winter. Always polite, kept to himself. I walked halfway up the street trying to get a better look. The closer I got, the weirder it felt. It wasn't that the house looked lit from within. It was more like the windows themselves were emitting a kind of backlight. Like there was no source of light inside, but the glass had this soft haze to it. I stopped at the curb and just stared at it. Nothing moved. No shadows, no silhouettes. The blinds were all drawn, but there was that same soft pressure to the glow, like it knew I was watching. After maybe a minute of standing there, the porch light clicked on. Not all at once. It faded up slowly, unnaturally slow, until it reached full brightness. It was the only normal light I saw the whole night. The front door opened a second later. Dennis stepped out, squinting like someone who just woke up. He was wearing a robe, slippers, holding a glass of water. He looked down the street and saw me, raised his hand in a half wave. I cleared my throat. "Hey, you got power?" He frowned. "No, you?" I gestured vaguely behind me. "Nope, just saw your house looked kinda lit up." He turned and looked behind him, then back at me. "It's dark in there. Whole place is off." I stared at him. "Your porch light just came on." He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but his eyebrows crept up a little. "I didn't flip anything," he said. "Didn't even notice." We stood like that for a moment. I didn't know what else to say. The light spilling out from behind him onto the porch didn't match the glow I'd seen from the street. It was warm, incandescent. The other glow, the one from the windows, was colder, whiter, different altogether. "You mind if I look?" I asked. "Inside?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure." I followed him up the steps. As soon as I crossed onto the porch, the light from the windows seemed to vanish, like flipping a switch. Now it looked like a normal house again. dark, with a few battery lanterns set up inside. I stepped just inside the front door and looked around. Darkness. Real darkness. Just like my place. "See?" Dennis said. "No power. Got the emergency lights from the garage. Figured I'd ride it out." He wasn't lying. The place was dim. The kitchen had one of those battery-powered puck lights magneted to the fridge, and the rest of the house was silent. No fridge hum, no furnace, no glow. I stepped back onto the porch and looked at the street. From here, his house looked like the others. Normal. Dark. Nothing strange about the windows. I looked over my shoulder into the living room. Still dark. I mumbled something about heading home and thanked him. He nodded, closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I turned around twice. The house stayed dark, but when I got to my driveway, I looked again. The glow was back. Faint, just like before. This time, it didn't pulse. It held steady. I didn't go back. Power came back around 1 a.m. Everything buzzed to life. The fridge, the thermostat, the microwave blinking 12. I walked to the window and checked again. Dennis's house was lit up like the others now. Normal, lamps on, porch lights steady. The glow was gone. The next afternoon, I saw him walking his dog and waved. He stopped at the end of my driveway and said, "Hey, you still think my house was lit up last night?" I nodded. "Yeah, it looked that way." He frowned, tugged his coat tighter. "I checked the breaker box this morning," he said. "Everything was tripped." "All of it?" He nodded. "Whole panel." There was a pause. Then he added, "Dog wouldn't go near the living room last night. Slept in the laundry room." I looked down at the dog, this old yellow lab that usually barked at everything. She stood there next to him, wagging her tail, happy as can be. I didn't ask anything else, and Dennis didn't offer. I was camping solo in the Green Mountains in Vermont last September. Not deep wilderness, just one of the small, state-run campsites near Somerset Reservoir. I'd been up that way a couple times with friends before, but this time I went alone. I needed the quiet. The weather had cooled off just enough to keep bugs down. Low 60s during the day, upper 40s at night. No rain in the forecast. The site I picked was one of the walk-in ones, maybe 300 feet off the main loop. Close enough to the parking lot that I wasn't fully isolated, but far enough that I couldn't see or hear other campers. It was my second night there. I'd spent most of the day hiking up to the fire tower near Stratton Mountain and got back to camp a little after 7. Sun was already down behind the trees. So I lit the fire, made dinner, and sat there for a while just zoning out. I didn't have cell service and had left my phone off most of the time to conserve battery. Around 10:15, I let the fire burn down and got ready to crash. No tent, just a hammock and a tarp setup. I'd been reading with a headlamp for a bit and turned it off to give my eyes a break before sleep. That's when I saw the glow. It started behind the trees to the east, down the slope where the hill drops off toward the reservoir. It wasn't bright at first, just a soft pale light like moonlight through fog. But the moon wasn't up yet, and there was no fog. At first I thought it might be someone hiking in late with a lantern or something, but it was too steady. It didn't sway. It didn't flicker. It just slowly got brighter. I sat up in the hammock and watched. The glow was maybe 30 or 40 yards off, still mostly hidden by the tree trunks, but I could see it cast long shadows across the forest floor. Sharp ones, the kind you only get from a single strong light source. It wasn't white like a flashlight. It had this strange pale yellow tone, almost like sunlight through a storm cloud, but muted. And it didn't light up the way you'd expect. It didn't bounce around or catch the leaves in a natural way. It felt directional, like it was aimed. I listened hard, but there was no sound. No footsteps, no voices, no crunching brush. Just the usual background noise, bugs, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere deeper in the woods. I got out of the hammock quietly and stood barefoot on the tarp. I didn't move closer. I just stood there watching the shadows shift slightly as the glow brightened and then held steady. And then, just like that, it shut off. Not faded, not moved. It turned off instantly like a light switch. I waited. Nothing. My eyes struggled to adjust to the sudden dark again. The shadows disappeared, and it was back to blackness under the trees. Bugs kept chirping. I clicked my headlamp on low and scanned the woods in that direction. Nothing but trees and ferns and the slope down to the water. No path, no movement. I walked a few feet past my hammock and stood at the edge of the rise. Still no sound. I stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing happened. Eventually, I sat back down in the hammock and left the light on for a while. Didn't read, just sat. It took a long time to fall asleep. Next morning, I walked down the slope where the glow had been. There was no trail, but the underbrush was thin. I didn't find anything. No campsites, no fire rings, no trash, no signs anyone had come through. But maybe 20 feet down, there was this spot where the leaf litter looked disturbed. Not like trampled, more like pushed aside, almost in a perfect circle, maybe 6 feet across. The soil was bare in the middle, a little dry, a little off color, like it had been exposed longer than the rest of the forest floor. I stood there for a while, just looking at it. There wasn't a smell, there weren't any markings, but it didn't feel right, and I didn't linger long. I packed up and left that afternoon instead of staying the third night like I'd planned. I don't know what it was. It wasn't fire. It wasn't a person. I've camped a lot. I know what headlamps and lanterns and phones look like from a distance. This wasn't any of those. It felt like something was there and then it just wasn't. Like I'd caught a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see. It started with a stupid notification. I hadn't touched my phone. It was plugged in on the nightstand, same as always. But at 3:14 a.m., it buzzed like I had a text. I cracked one eye open, groggy, and saw that the screen was lit up with that little camera icon in the top left. The one it shows when the camera's being used. That was weird. I didn't open the camera. No apps were running. I unlocked it, checked my notifications, nothing except a single video saved under the Photos app. Timestamped 3:12 a.m. I didn't even remember hitting record. I played the video. It was just darkness at first. The audio was all low hiss and occasional pops. I assumed it was some kind of pocket recording fluke, even though the phone hadn't been anywhere near me. Then I noticed the window, or what I figured was the window, based on the angle. There was a faint light, not from inside. It was outside the window, way in the back corner of the frame, barely there. Kind of bluish. It pulsed, not in a strobe way, just this slow, steady, faint, stronger, faint again. No pattern I could recognize, but definitely not random. And then, at the very end, maybe the last second, the light jumped. I don't mean moved across the screen, I mean it was suddenly closer, like it had skipped the space in between. Then the video cut out. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I looked over at the window, just blinds and blackness behind it, no light. I didn't move for maybe 10 minutes, just stared at the window and listened. Nothing. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer, and went outside. It was cold. Still night, probably about 3:30 by then. I live in a small place outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. Rural enough that my nearest neighbor's a quarter-mile away. I rent a little ranch-style house with a big backyard that backs up to woods. I walked the perimeter of the yard, sweeping the flashlight over the trees, the grass, the fence. No animals, no people, nothing out of place. But when I got back to the front porch, I stopped. There were prints on the dewy grass. Not shoe prints, just flattened patches, maybe 5 of them, spaced out in a loose arc near the side of the house where the bedroom window is. They were shallow, but I could tell something had been there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to shrug it off. I told myself I must have triggered the camera by accident. Maybe the phone glitched and recorded nothing special. Maybe the light was just some kind of reflection or an LED from a car or something. But I couldn't stop thinking about how it moved. Or didn't move, just appeared closer. That night, I set the phone on my dresser facing the window, camera app open but not recording. Just in case. I left the blinds cracked about an inch. At 2:58 a.m., the screen lit up again. I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I'd been lying in bed, phone face down, trying not to overthink things. The moment I saw that screen glow through the dark, I sat up. This time, the camera was on again, recording. It had started on its own. I hadn't set anything to trigger it. I walked over and picked up the phone. Same as before, almost total blackness on the preview screen. But I could see that faint blue pulse again, even before watching the saved clip. I turned and looked at the window. Nothing. Played the video. Same hissing audio. Same darkness. Same faint light outside the window, pulsing slow. But this time, at the 6-second mark, there was a sound. It didn't come from the video, it came from outside. A single dull tap on the window pane. I dropped the phone. I backed away, staring at the blinds. There was no second tap. No shadows, no movement. But the moment that sound came, the light in the video jumped again. Closer, closer than before. It looked like it was just on the other side of the glass. And then it blinked out. When I built up the nerve to yank the blinds up, there was nothing. No prints this time. No sound, no motion. I didn't go back to sleep. I stayed on the couch, lights on, until sunrise. The next day at work, I told a guy I trust, Reed, from maintenance. He's not the type to make fun. He just said, "Sounds like you caught some kind of infrared glitch," which didn't help much because I hadn't been using night vision or anything. It was just my regular phone camera. That night, I turned the camera off entirely. I powered down the phone, unplugged it, stuffed it in a drawer across the room. Didn't matter. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke up. Not to noise, not to a buzz. I just woke up, fully alert, and the window was glowing. Not bright, not like headlights, just that same soft, bluish pulse, like moonlight if the moon were too close and too cold. It leaked through the blinds, moving in a rhythm. Faint, brighter, faint. I didn't move. Just watched it from bed, trying not to breathe too loud. It kept pulsing. And then, for no reason I can explain, I got the overwhelming feeling that if I opened the blinds, something would be there. Not standing outside, not looking in, just there, too close. I got up and walked out of the room, sat in the kitchen with all the lights on until morning. When I finally checked the phone, it was powered on. Still sitting in the drawer, still at 100%. There was no new video. But the camera roll had a single black image saved at 3:12 a.m. No metadata. No thumbnail, just a pitch black square that wouldn't delete until I restarted the phone. I tried to brush it all off after that, told myself to stop letting my brain run wild, didn't talk about it, didn't record anything else. I thought maybe it was over. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night now, the phone screen is lit up. No videos, no photos, just the screen, glowing in the dark like it's watching something. Like it was in the middle of doing something and stopped the second I moved. And every now and then, when I look toward the window, I think I can see the faintest flicker of that cold bluish light behind the blinds. Not every night, just enough that I keep the bedroom door closed now. The first time the motion light came on, I was brushing my teeth and thought a car had pulled into the driveway. The bathroom window faced the backyard, not the street, but light carries weird at night, and I didn't think much of it. I rinsed, leaned forward to spit, and when I looked back up, the light was still on. Solid white. Too bright for a passing car. I finished up and walked to the back door in my socks. The glass was cold, fogged slightly where my breath hit it. The yard looked normal. Patchy grass, the old maple near the fence, my neighbor's shed, half visible over the boards. Nothing moved. No wind. No animals. The light shut off while I stood there watching, like it got bored of me. I checked the camera feed on my phone. The app loaded slow as usual. The clip showed the yard in night vision, grainy and gray. Timestamp matched the minute I'd been brushing my teeth. The motion box flashed red for about 2 seconds. Nothing was in frame. No distortion, no shadow, just empty grass and the fence. I shrugged it off and went to bed. The second night it happened, I was already half asleep on the couch. I'd put something dumb on TV for background noise and dozed off with my phone on my chest. The sudden wash of light through the living room window jolted me awake. For a split second, I thought it was morning. Then the TV was still on, and it was still dark outside. I sat up and looked out. Same thing. Yard empty. Motion light blazing. This time, as I stared at it, there was a quick flash in the sky. Not lightning, no thunder. Just a brief, pale pulse, like someone had flicked a dimmer switch on the clouds. It was over so fast I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. The backyard light shut off a second later. I checked the camera again, same result. Motion alert, no visible movement. The sky flash didn't show up at all. The night vision stayed flat and gray. By the third night, I was waiting for it. I turned off all the lights in the house and sat at the kitchen table with the blinds tilted just enough to see the yard without reflecting my own face back at me. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. I started to feel stupid, like I'd built the whole thing up in my head. At 1:17 a.m., the motion light snapped on. At the exact same moment, the sky above the yard flashed. Not bright, just enough to notice. Like a camera flash from very far away, filtered through clouds. My stomach dropped in that quiet, heavy way it does when something stops feeling coincidental. I checked the time on my phone, then I checked the camera feed. Then I checked the time again because I suddenly didn't trust it. The timestamps all matched. I stayed up until almost 3 that morning. It didn't happen again. The next day I asked my neighbor, Carla, if she'd noticed anything weird at night. She lived alone and worked early shifts, usually asleep by 10. She laughed and said the only weird thing she'd noticed lately was how bright the sky had been some nights, like the city glow was worse than usual. She asked if I was seeing things again, half joking. I laughed too and changed the subject. That night, it happened twice. The first time was around midnight. Same pattern. Motion light, sky flash, nothing on camera. The second time was closer to 2, and that one felt different. The light stayed on longer. Almost 10 seconds. Long enough that my eyes adjusted and I could really take in the yard. Everything looked flat. Too flat. Like the depth was wrong. The tree didn't feel as far away as it should have. The fence line looked closer, compressed, like the yard had been folded in on itself, just a little. Then the sky flashed again, a little stronger this time, and the light went out. When I checked the camera clip, my hands were shaking enough that I fumbled my phone. The footage still showed nothing, but there was a single frame where the contrast spiked, like the sensor had been overwhelmed for a fraction of a second. The timestamp skipped forward by 1 second after that frame. I didn't sleep. On the 5th night, I unplugged the motion light. I figured if it was broken, at least I'd stop getting startled awake. The yard stayed dark. No sudden brightness. No shadows. I sat on the couch with the TV off, listening to the house settle. At 12:42 a.m., the sky flashed anyway. The light wasn't there to mirror it this time, but the glow reflected faintly off the fence and the side of the house. It wasn't coming from any direction I could place. It felt like it was everywhere at once, low and diffuse. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Motion alert. I opened the app and stared at the screen. The camera was still plugged in, still working. The motion light was definitely unplugged. The clip showed the yard in darkness, the infrared grain heavier than usual. The motion box flashed red. Nothing moved. The timestamp jumped backward by 1 minute at the end of the clip. That was the night I finally went outside. I didn't plan to. I just found myself pulling on shoes and grabbing my jacket like my body had already decided before my brain caught up. The air felt thick when I opened the back door. Not warm, not cold, just dense, like humidity without the moisture. The yard smelled wrong. Not bad, just different. Like after a storm, but there hadn't been one. I stood on the concrete patio and waited. For a long time, nothing happened. I started to feel ridiculous again. I was halfway through convincing myself to go back inside when the pressure changed. That's the only way I can describe it. My ears popped slightly, like being on a slow elevator. The sky flashed. This time it wasn't just light. There was a shape to it. A soft-edged brightness that slid across the clouds, not illuminating them so much as passing through them. The motion light, unplugged as it was, snapped on for half a second and then died. I took an involuntary step back. The camera on the house clicked. Not loudly, just a faint mechanical sound like it was refocusing. I looked up again and felt that same compression in my chest, the sense that the yard wasn't quite the size it should be. The tree felt closer. The fence felt too far away now, like the space between things was breathing. Then it was over. The sky went dark, the air felt normal, the motion light stayed off, the camera stopped clicking. I stood there until my legs started to ache. I went inside and locked the door, even though I knew how pointless that probably was. It stopped after that. Completely. No more motion alerts. No more sky flashes. The camera behaved normally. The yard looked like a yard again. A week later, Carla mentioned casually that she'd been having trouble with her porch light turning on for no reason. She said it always happened late at night, and she'd started unscrewing the bulb before bed. I told her maybe it was just wiring. I didn't check my camera footage anymore. I still don't leave the blinds open at night. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I swear the bathroom feels a little brighter than it should for just a second. Like dawn trying to start early and thinking better of it. I was pulling over to stretch my legs when I saw it. I'd been driving west on Route 62 for hours, the part that cuts through nothing but scrub and old fence lines. The sun had dropped behind the hills, but the sky still held that dull orange-blue mix that sticks around longer in the desert. My name's Aaron Blake. I was 34 at the time, working construction in Phoenix, driving back from a job near Joshua Tree. I'd made that drive more times than I could count. I killed the engine and stepped out because my knees were stiff and my head felt full, in that way it does after too much road noise. No wind, no traffic, just that low evening quiet where even your own breathing feels loud. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a plane. There's a military base far enough away that you get weird flight paths sometimes. But this wasn't blinking, it was a steady white. Not bright like a spotlight, not dim like a star. It moved slowly from left to right, smooth enough that my eyes had trouble tracking it at first. I leaned against the hood and watched it, waiting for the usual signs to click into place. Engine noise, a change in altitude, anything familiar? Nothing. It glided, and I mean glided, like it wasn't pushing through air at all. No wobble, no correction, just a clean, flat motion. I remember thinking I should grab my phone, then not doing it. Part of me didn't want to break whatever was happening by looking away. The light slowed. It didn't drift or arc, it just reduced speed, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. Then it stopped. Not hovered, stopped. It sat there, fixed in the sky for maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5. Time felt soft around it, like my brain wasn't keeping good records. Then it dropped, straight down. No curve, no angle, no acceleration ramp up. It was there, and then it wasn't, like someone erased a line from the sky. I actually laughed once, short and sharp, because my body didn't know what else to do. I waited for a flash or a sound or dust or something on the horizon. Nothing happened. The sky looked normal again. Same colors, same empty stretch. If I hadn't been staring at that exact patch, I would have missed it entirely. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. My ears felt tight, like after you leave a loud room. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. I got back in the car and drove. For a while, that was it. No missing time, no marks, no follow-up. Just a story that didn't fit anywhere. But about 20 minutes later, I realized my dash clock didn't make sense. I'd reset it that morning after the battery hiccuped. I knew what time it was when I stopped. The clock said I was 9 minutes ahead of where I should have been. Not hours. Not something dramatic. Just enough to be wrong. I told myself I'd misremembered. Desert drives mess with your sense of time, so I let it go. Until the radio started acting up. I had it tuned to a classic rock station out of Palm Springs. Clear signal most of the way. It faded into static without warning, then settled into this low, even tone. Not feedback, not buzzing. A single note, steady and flat like a test signal. It wasn't loud, but I felt it more than I heard it. A pressure behind my eyes. My chest felt tight, like when you hold your breath too long. I reached to turn the knob and the tone cut out instantly. The station snapped back like nothing had happened. A mile later, the headlights washed over something metallic. Just a flash. It reflected back at me from above the road, not on it, maybe 15 feet up, enough that my stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I hit the brakes. The road was empty. No sign, no wires, no drone. Just open air and the asphalt stretching forward. I sat there with my foot on the brake, heart thudding, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, I drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, I barely slept at the motel in Blythe. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I'd missed something important by blinking at the wrong moment. The next morning, my phone battery was at 12%. I'd plugged it in overnight. The usage screen showed activity between 2:11 and 2:19 a.m. Steps recorded. Location pings behind the motel near the edge of the lot. I didn't remember getting up. When I pulled the curtain back, the fabric felt warm. Not sun-warmed. The sun wasn't up yet. Just warm, like it had been held close to something that wasn't there anymore. I stood there for a long time, watching the sky lighten the normal way this time, waiting for something else to peel back or drop or glide across it. Nothing did. I drove home later that morning. Same road, same landmarks. Everything where it belonged. But every now and then, especially at dusk, I still catch myself watching the sky instead of the road, waiting for something to pause where it shouldn't and decide to leave in a way nothing else does. I woke up because the room felt wrong, not because of a noise. It was the kind of half-awake moment where your eyes are still closed but your body is already alert. Something was pressing down on me, not physically, just this heavy sense that the air had changed. Then I realized there was a sound. It was low and steady, almost below hearing. More like pressure than noise, like standing near a transformer or a big generator somewhere far away. It didn't come from outside the window or from any one direction. It felt like it was coming from above the house, straight down through the ceiling. I lay there for a few seconds trying to place it. I thought maybe a truck was idling nearby or a plane passing overhead. But it didn't rise or fade like an engine. It was perfectly even, like it had been switched on and left alone. My ears felt full, like when you're changing altitude too fast. I checked the clock on my nightstand. It was 2:38 a.m. The house was quiet otherwise. No fridge hum, no air vents kicking on. The heater hadn't run in hours. I held my breath, just to make sure it wasn't coming from me somehow. The sound didn't change. The weirdest part was how calm it felt. Not comforting, exactly, but neutral. Like whatever was making the sound wasn't in a hurry and didn't care whether I noticed it or not. I finally sat up. The instant my shoulders left the mattress, the hum stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone flipped a switch. The sudden silence made my ears ring sharply, a high-pitched tone that cut through my head. I winced and pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The ringing slowly settled into a dull hiss. The house felt hollow after that, like all the background noise had been sucked out and hadn't fully come back yet. Even the silence sounded thin. I stayed sitting there, heart starting to thump harder now that the sound was gone. I listened for anything else. Footsteps, wind, a car passing. Nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the normal sounds returned in pieces. The fridge clicked on, a pipe ticked somewhere in the wall, the ringing in my ears finally faded. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside was dark and still, no lights in the sky, no neighbors moving around. My street was empty, lined with parked cars and tall trees that blocked most of the view upward. I craned my neck, trying to see above the roofline. Nothing. I opened the window a crack. Cool air came in, smelling faintly like damp leaves. No sound, no vibration. I told myself it was probably a power thing. Some kind of electrical equipment cycling on and off. Even though that didn't explain why it stopped the exact second I sat up. I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, wide awake now. I waited for the hum to come back. It didn't. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. Morning light filled the room like nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until I noticed how tired I felt. Not groggy, but drained, like I hadn't rested at all. That night, it happened again. This time I was awake when it started. I was lying on my back, scrolling through my phone, trying to wind down. The house was quiet, lights off, just the glow of the screen. At 2:41 a.m., the air changed. My phone vibrated in my hand as the signal dropped to 0 bars. The screen dimmed slightly, like the battery had taken a sudden hit. Then the hum started. Same low frequency, same even pressure. It felt stronger this time, like it was pressing directly on my chest. My ribs felt tight, like it was harder to take a full breath. I didn't move. I stared at the ceiling and waited, heart pounding, phone forgotten in my hand. The hum didn't fluctuate. It didn't grow louder. It just existed. I became acutely aware of how small the room felt, how thin the ceiling was, how exposed the house suddenly seemed. My ears started to ache. I sat up. The hum cut out instantly again. The ringing came back, sharper this time. My phone buzzed with notifications all at once as the signal returned. I checked the battery. It had dropped 8% in less than a minute. I didn't sleep after that. The third night, I set up my phone to record audio before going to bed. I didn't really expect it to catch anything, but I needed proof that it wasn't just in my head. The hum started at 2:39 a.m. I felt it wake me before I heard it. My chest tightened, breath shallow. The sound pressed down through the ceiling like weight. I reached for the phone and forced myself to stay still, even though every instinct told me to sit up. The pressure built slowly, not louder, just heavier. Then my ears started ringing before I moved. That scared me. I sat up hard. Silence. Later, when I checked the recording, there was nothing, just my breathing, the faint rustle of sheets, and then silence again. No hum, no vibration. But the timestamp jumped forward by almost 3 minutes. I started paying attention after that. I noticed that the nights it happened, the stars directly above my house looked dimmer when I checked the window afterward. Not gone, just muted, like something thin and translucent was in the way. It never happened on nights when it was raining. It never happened when I had someone else in the house. One night, I didn't sit up right away. The hum went on longer than usual. My chest felt tight, and my vision started to blur around the edges. The ringing in my ears came back even though the sound was still there. That's when I panicked and sat up. The silence slammed back in, and I gasped like I'd been underwater. After that, I stopped trying to record it. I stopped checking the time. I started sleeping on the couch sometimes, closer to the ground, even though it didn't seem to make a difference. Eventually, the hum stopped coming. Weeks passed without anything happening. My sleep slowly returned to normal, though I still woke up sometimes with that same heavy feeling, like I'd missed something important. I thought it was over. Then my neighbor, Carl, mentioned offhand one afternoon that he'd been waking up with ringing ears lately. He laughed it off, said it was probably age or allergies. He didn't mention a sound, he didn't mention pressure. I didn't ask questions. The hum hasn't come back since. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, the house feels too quiet again, like the background noise hasn't fully returned. When that happens, I don't sit up right away, I wait and listen, just in case. I was already halfway around the block when I noticed the light. It was late, a little after midnight, and I'd gone out because I couldn't sleep. That happened a lot after my split with Dana. The house felt too quiet, and walking helped burn off the leftover energy. I took the same route most nights, looping through the older part of the neighborhood where the sidewalks were cracked and the streetlights were spaced too far apart. The air was cool and damp, not quite foggy, but heavy enough that sounds didn't travel far. My footsteps felt loud in my ears. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. I was cutting past the park when something caught my eye above the trees. At first I thought it was a plane. There was a single white light moving slowly across the sky, steady and smooth. No blinking, no color changes. It wasn't very bright, but it stood out against the clouds. I kept walking and didn't think much of it. Planes passed overhead all the time. There was a small airport about 30 miles away. But then I noticed how slow it was. Not drifting slow, like a satellite, more deliberate. It moved at a steady pace, almost matching my walking speed, sliding from left to right above the tree line. I slowed down a little, just to check something. The light slowed too. I stopped walking. The light stopped. It didn't fade, it didn't drift. It just hung there, perfectly still, suspended in the sky. I stood there with one foot slightly forward, my weight shifted awkwardly, staring up. My heart started to beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from that sudden realization that something didn't line up. After a few seconds, I took a step forward. The light moved again. Same direction, same speed. I laughed quietly to myself, mostly out of disbelief. I told myself it was coincidence. Perspective. My movement tricking my eyes. I walked again, deliberately this time, 3 steps. The light slid along above me, keeping pace. I stopped. It stopped. The silence felt heavier all of a sudden. Even the background hum of the city seemed to drop out. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. I looked around to make sure I wasn't the only one outside. The park was empty. Houses were dark. No cars passed. I raised my hand and waved it, feeling stupid. The light didn't react. I started walking again, faster this time. The light followed, still smooth, still silent. It didn't bob or sway. It didn't lag behind or pull ahead. It stayed exactly where it was relative to me. My skin prickled along my arms. I tried something else. I turned around and walked the other direction. The light changed direction instantly, sliding back the way it had come, still pacing me. That's when the fear finally kicked in. Not panic, but that cold, sinking feeling in my stomach that comes when you realize you don't understand the rules of what's happening. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving, to get home. I headed toward my street, forcing myself not to break into a run. The light stayed with me, hovering above the line of houses now, partially obscured by roofs and chimneys, but always visible when there was a gap. I stopped again, right at the corner. The light stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing changed. I reached into my pocket for my phone. The screen lit up my hand, and my signal dropped to nothing. No bars. The battery indicator flickered and dropped by 2% in the second it took me to unlock it. I didn't bother trying to take a picture. I already knew what would happen. I put the phone away and started walking again. The light moved. By the time I reached my driveway, my legs felt shaky. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, and looked up one last time. The light hovered above the house across the street, just beyond the roofline. I took a step backward. It slid backward. I took a step forward. It followed. I unlocked the door and went inside, closing it quietly behind me like that mattered. I stood in the dark living room, heart pounding, listening. Nothing. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see out. The light was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made me sit up. I checked the windows twice. I kept expecting that low pressure feeling, like the air was changing again. The next night, I went out walking anyway. I told myself I wasn't going to let one weird thing mess up my routine. I stuck to the same route, same pace. Nothing happened. No light. The night after that, I almost convinced myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, my brain filling in gaps. Then it happened again. This time I saw it sooner. Same single white light, same height, same steady glow. It appeared above the trees as I crossed into the park. I stopped immediately. The light stopped. There was no doubt anymore. I started walking, slow and careful, like I might spook it if I moved wrong. The light matched me exactly. I sped up. It sped up. I slowed. It slowed. I tried walking sideways along the path. The light adjusted smoothly, never overshooting, never hesitating. It felt less like something following me and more like something tracking my position, like I was the reference point. I stayed out longer that night, testing it. I walked in loops, I doubled back, I paused randomly. Every time the light responded, it never came closer, never farther away. It kept the same distance, like there was an invisible line it wouldn't cross. Eventually, my fear shifted into something else. Not curiosity exactly, more like resignation. I went home. The light stayed with me until I reached my driveway again. When I stopped, it stopped. When I stepped inside and closed the door, it vanished. The third time it happened, I didn't go home right away. I walked until my legs hurt, circling the neighborhood, moving faster and faster, daring it to mess up. It didn't. At one point, I stood in the middle of the street, breathing hard, sweat cooling on my neck, staring straight up. I whispered, "What are you doing?" The light didn't react. When I finally turned toward home, it followed one last time. At my door, I stopped. The light stopped. I waited, keys in hand. After a few seconds, the light moved on its own. It drifted sideways, slow and deliberate, away from me and toward the far end of the street. It didn't speed up, it didn't fade. It just slid along until the houses blocked my view. I haven't seen it since. I still go on late walks. I keep my pace steady. Sometimes, when I stop for no reason at all, I feel that same tightness in my chest, like something is waiting to see what I'll do next. When that happens, I don't look up right away. I start walking again first. I woke up because my wrist felt tight, like the band on my watch had twisted while I slept. I was half dreaming, still foggy, and the first thing I noticed was the glow. Not the screen glow. The room itself felt faintly lit, like there was a street light too close to the window. That didn't make sense because my bedroom faces the backyard, and the nearest light is a good 100 yards away by the road. I rolled onto my side and checked the time, 2:17 a.m. The watch buzzed once, the way it does when it reconnects after losing signal. That's when I saw the activity alert. It showed 6 minutes of walking logged between 2:03 and 2:09. A neat little spike, heart rate elevated, steps counted. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to catch up and tell me it was a glitch. I live alone. I hadn't been sleepwalking since I was a kid, and even then it was rare. I hadn't felt sore or disoriented waking up. My feet weren't dirty. The back door was still locked. The motion sensor in the hallway hadn't gone off. Everything about the house felt normal except for the light. I sat up, and that was when the quiet hit me. It wasn't silence exactly. It was like the background noise had been turned down too far. No distant traffic, no hum from the fridge, no wind in the trees. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. My ears rang faintly, like after a pressure change. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The sky looked wrong. It wasn't bright like dawn or like city glow reflecting off clouds. It was evenly lit, a soft gray blue that made the backyard visible without shadows. The oak tree at the fence line looked flat, like it was cut out and pasted there. I couldn't see stars. I couldn't see clouds either. Just this smooth, dim brightness hanging over everything. I checked my phone for the weather. Clear skies, no alerts, no power outage reported. My signal bars flickered once, dropped to nothing, then came back. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to decide if I was still half asleep. That's when I noticed the time again. 2:19. 2 minutes had passed, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like I'd been standing there a lot longer. I stepped back from the window, and the light outside dimmed slightly, like someone had adjusted a dial. That scared me more than if it had vanished outright. I didn't want to think I was affecting it. I checked the rest of the house. The front door was locked. The alarm system showed nothing unusual. No alerts, no recorded motion. The back door camera feed was clear, but the image looked washed out, like the contrast had been flattened. I opened the back door anyway. Cold air rushed in, sharper than it should have been for early fall. The backyard looked the same as through the window, evenly lit with no clear source. The grass didn't move, the leaves didn't rustle. My breath fogged slightly, though the temperature reading on my phone said it was 58. I took one step onto the porch and felt it immediately. That sense you get when someone's looking at you. Not fear exactly, more like pressure behind the eyes. I glanced up without meaning to. The sky wasn't empty. There was a darker patch directly overhead. Not a shape, not something you could outline. Just an area where the light thinned, like something massive was blocking it without casting a shadow. It didn't move when I moved my head. It stayed centered. My watch buzzed again. Another reconnect vibration. I didn't look at it. I went back inside and locked the door, heart pounding now. As soon as the door shut, the quiet cracked. The fridge kicked on. A car passed somewhere in the distance. The house settled. Normal sounds rushed back in like they'd been waiting. I checked the time, 2:41 a.m. I don't remember the missing minutes. I don't remember standing there that long. I don't remember going back to the window or looking up again. All I know is that my watch now showed another block of activity. This one 11 minutes long, with my heart rate higher than it's ever been while exercising. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch with all the lights on until sunrise. When the sun came up, everything looked normal. The yard looked normal. The oak tree cast proper shadows again. Birds showed up like nothing had happened. Later that morning, I checked the camera footage more carefully. The timestamps were intact, no gaps, but at exactly 2:05 a.m. and again at 2:28 a.m., the image brightened for less than a second, like a flash with no direction. No motion triggered, no sound recorded. I called my sister, Jenna, and told her I hadn't slept well. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to hear it out loud yet. That night, I charged my watch and phone fully and went to bed early. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and turned off all notifications. I left the curtains open. I woke up just after 3 a.m. without any alarm. The room was dark, normal dark. The watch was still on my wrist, no activity logged. I was starting to convince myself it had been a one-off, some weird overlap of bad sensors and stress, when I noticed the sky again, not glowing this time, just brighter than it should have been. Enough that I could see the outline of the fence. I didn't get up. I stayed still, barely breathing. A minute later, the brightness faded. Not all at once. It pulled upward, like fog lifting in reverse, leaving the stars behind. I checked the watch when it was gone. No new movement logged. I didn't look outside again after that. I still wear the watch. I still live in the same house. Every once in a while, I wake up with that pressure behind my eyes and the sense that I missed something important. The data doesn't always show it, but sometimes my watch buzzes in the middle of the night like it's reconnecting to something that isn't there anymore. I was sitting on the back steps with my jacket zipped up, staring at the sky because I couldn't sleep. It was late enough that the neighborhood was quiet, but not dead. Somebody's dryer thumping a block over, a car passing every now and then. The air was cold and still, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. I lived outside of town then, just far enough that the streetlights didn't completely drown out the stars. I'd started doing this thing where I picked one star and watched it until my eyes got tired. It helped slow my thoughts down. If you stare long enough, the sky starts to feel less huge and more like a ceiling. I picked one low in the sky, just above the tree line. It wasn't especially bright, but it stood out because it didn't twinkle much. It felt steady, solid. I remember thinking it was probably a planet, but I didn't bother checking. I watched it for a while, and so waft breathing fog into my sleeves, counting my exhales. Nothing happened at first. The night felt normal. Too normal, honestly. Then the star moved. Not fast, not sudden. It slid sideways, smooth and quiet, like someone nudging a chess piece across a board. Just a little bit at first. I thought it was my eyes, so I blinked hard and looked away at the roofline, then back. It was still drifting. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not panic, more like confusion so deep it felt physical. Stars don't do that. Planes blink, satellites glide. This didn't glide. It adjusted, corrected itself slightly, like it was staying level with something I couldn't see. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. The wood step creaked under my boot, loud as a gunshot. The star kept moving. I whispered no under my breath, like that would somehow stop it. It slid another inch across the sky, then slowed. For a second, just one, I couldn't tell if I was looking at movement or if my brain was filling it in. The star dimmed slightly, not enough to vanish, just enough to feel thinner, and then it blended back into the sky. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't turn off, it didn't shoot away. The point of light softened, spread out, and suddenly it was just gone. Or maybe it was still there, and my eyes couldn't separate it from everything else anymore. I stood there with my mouth open, staring at the spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, completely normal. I checked other stars, comparing positions, trying to convince myself I'd picked the wrong reference point. I hadn't. My hands were shaking, not badly, but enough that I noticed. I pulled my phone out and opened a star map app, feeling stupid even as I did it. The app showed the sky exactly as it should be. No gaps, no missing points. I stayed outside another 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing else happened. The cold started to creep through my jacket, and my rational brain slowly clawed its way back in. I went inside and locked the door, which I didn't usually do that early. I stood in the kitchen for a bit, just listening. The house sounded the same as it always did. Fridge humming, pipes ticking. I told myself it was an illusion. Fatigue, eye strain, maybe a satellite at a weird angle. I repeated that explanation until it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. The next night, I went back out. I didn't plan to. I told myself I wouldn't. But around the same time, my body just expected something, like a habit I hadn't meant to form. It was cloudier that night. The stars were patchy, coming and going behind thin gray streaks. I sat on the steps again, hugging a mug I didn't really want, scanning the sky without focusing too hard. I didn't see the same star. At least, I don't think I did. What I did notice was how quiet it felt, not silent, just muted. The crickets had stopped, which happens sometimes, but even the distant road noise felt dampened, like someone had closed a door somewhere far away. Then one of the stars near the center of my view dimmed, not disappeared, just dulled like a light behind fog. I leaned forward, squinting. It shifted sideways. This one moved faster. Not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was my eyes. It slid, paused, then slid again, always smooth, always controlled. No blinking, no trail. I felt that same pressure in my chest, like when an elevator stops too abruptly. I pulled my phone up again, hands clumsy, and as soon as the screen lit my face, the star stopped moving. It just stayed there. I lowered the phone slowly, watching the sky over the top edge. The star held still for a few seconds, then faded back into the background exactly like the night before. I didn't stay outside after that. I went straight to bed, locked the door again, and lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, every time I thought I had it pinned down. Some natural explanation, some trick of light, it slipped away. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Not every night. Not at the same spot in the sky. Always subtle. Always brief. A star that drifted when it shouldn't. A point of light that thinned and vanished without actually going anywhere. Once I was with someone else. My neighbor Mark was over, helping me move a broken shelf out to the curb. We finished up and stood there talking, both of us looking up without really meaning to. I saw it first, a star just above the power lines, steady and bright. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you see that one?" Mark followed my gaze. "Yeah." The star slid, just a little. "Is it moving?" I asked. He frowned. "I don't think so." It moved again, a clean sideways shift, unmistakable. "There," I said. "That?" Mark squinted. "I don't see." The star dimmed and blended into the sky mid-sentence. Mark looked at me. "See what?" I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the empty space, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud. "Never mind," I said finally. "Probably nothing." He shrugged and went back inside. I stayed out a bit longer, staring at a sky that suddenly felt like it was paying attention to me. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I closed the curtains earlier. I kept lights on. I tried not to look up when I walked to my car. It sounds ridiculous, but there was something about those movements that felt intentional. Not directed at me exactly. More like reactive, like when you notice someone across a room notice you back. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. My nerves settled. I started sleeping better. The explanations I'd rehearsed hardened into something I could almost believe. Then one night, lying in bed, I noticed the light in the room shift. Not brighter, not darker, just thinner. Like the air itself had changed density. I sat up, heart racing, and the feeling vanished instantly. Everything went back to normal. The house creaked. The heater kicked on. I didn't look out the window. I don't know what those stars were. I don't know if they were stars at all, or something passing in front of them, or something using them as cover. I don't know why they moved the way they did, or why they seemed to stop when I tried to capture them. All I know is that sometimes when I catch myself staring at the sky for too long, I feel that same quiet pressure in my chest, and I force myself to look away before anything has the chance to move again. I noticed it because the water didn't look right. I was sitting on a folding chair at the edge of the lake, boots off, socks rolled down, letting my feet dry in the cool air. It was late evening, just past sunset, that in-between time where the sky still held some color, but the woods had already started to darken. The lake was calm, almost flat, with only small ripples drifting toward shore. I'd come out alone after work. I live in a small town, and this lake sits about 15 minutes outside it, surrounded by state land. No houses right on the shore, no marina, no lights except a gravel lot with a single flickering lamp. It was a place people fished or drank beers or sat quietly when they didn't want to talk to anyone. That night it was quiet. No wind, no insects yet, just the occasional bird settling in somewhere behind me. I was scrolling through my phone, barely paying attention to the water, when I saw a pale glow under the surface, maybe 20 yards out. At first I thought it was just a reflection from the sky, some leftover light catching the angle wrong. Then it moved. The glow slid sideways, perfectly straight, like someone dragging a dim flashlight beam beneath the water. It didn't wobble or ripple. It didn't spread out. It stayed contained, a soft oval of light, gliding just under the surface. I lowered my phone without thinking and leaned forward. The water above the glow didn't react. No wake, no bubbles, no disturbance at all. It was like the light was passing through solid glass. I stood up slowly, heart starting to thump for no clear reason. My first thought was a submerged boat light or maybe some kind of underwater drone, but that didn't make sense here. This wasn't a recreational lake. No boats allowed with motors, and even if there were, the light was wrong. Too even, too muted. The glow continued its path, steady and unhurried, moving from left to right across the lake. I watched it pass through darker water, through faint reflections of trees, never changing shape. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell is that?" just to hear a voice. The glow reached a point roughly in front of me, maybe 10 yards offshore, and then it faded. Not abruptly. It dimmed like a light being lowered on a dial until there was nothing left. The water stayed calm. I waited for something to break the surface. A splash, a ripple, anything. Nothing happened. I stood there longer than I meant to, scanning the water, half expecting the glow to reappear somewhere else. It didn't. Eventually I sat back down, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe some weird bioluminescence. Maybe a trick of the light. I pulled out my phone again, Googled phrases like glowing lake water, and underwater light moving straight line. The results were useless. A few minutes later, the insects started up. Crickets, then something buzzing near the reeds. The normal night sounds returned, and with them came that uneasy feeling that I'd missed something important. I packed up and left earlier than planned. The next night, I came back. I told myself I just wanted to prove it was nothing, that I'd misseen something and needed closure. I brought a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and my phone fully charged. It was darker when I arrived, clouds covering most of the sky. The lake looked like a sheet of black glass. I sat in the same spot as before and waited. Nothing happened for a long time. I almost gave up and started packing again when I noticed the glow, farther out this time. It appeared suddenly, like it had been switched on, maybe 40 yards from shore. My stomach dropped. The light moved again in that same straight, precise line. No hesitation. No variation. It cut across the lake as if following an invisible track. I stood up, my hands shaking enough that I noticed it. I pulled out my phone and started recording, holding it steady on the water. The glow didn't react. It didn't speed up or slow down. It didn't rise. It just kept moving. As it passed closer to shore, I realized something else that made my skin prickle. The glow wasn't illuminating anything. It didn't cast light onto the underside of the surface. It didn't brighten the water around it. It was visible, but it didn't light. Like it wasn't actually light at all. My phone buzzed, the screen briefly flickering. I glanced down for half a second. When I looked back up, the glow was gone. I checked the video immediately. The recording was there, but when I scrubbed through it, the water stayed dark the entire time. No glow, no movement, just black ripples and distant reflections. I stood there breathing hard, the phone heavy in my hand. Behind me, somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. I spun around, flashlight up, heart racing. The beam caught trunks and leaves, nothing else, no footsteps, no voices. I left again. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back twice more, each time telling myself it was the last. Both times, the glow appeared. Different distances, same motion. Always straight, always silent, always gone before reaching the surface. Once, I thought I felt something through my feet. A faint vibration through the ground, like a heavy vehicle passing far away. Another time, my watch reset itself while I was standing there, jumping back exactly 3 minutes. I stopped trying to record it. The last night I went, the lake felt wrong even before anything happened. The air was too still. The insects hadn't started yet, even though it was well past dusk. The clouds hung low, dull, and heavy. The glow appeared closer than ever, maybe 10 yards out. It moved directly toward my position, not at me exactly, but parallel to the shore. As it passed in front of me, I noticed something new. The water above it wasn't reflecting the sky. Everywhere else, the surface showed faint cloud shapes, darker patches. Above the glow, the reflection was blank, empty, like a strip cut out of the lake. I took an involuntary step back. The glow slowed, just slightly, and for a moment I had the overwhelming sense that it was aware of me. Not watching, just accounting for me, like I was an obstacle on a road. Then it faded again, leaving the water unchanged. A few seconds later, the insects started up all at once, loud enough to make me flinch. I didn't stay. I haven't been back to the lake since. I drive past it sometimes and it looks normal, peaceful. Just water and trees and a quiet road. But now, whenever I'm near large bodies of water at night, I catch myself staring at the surface, waiting to see that soft, sliding glow beneath it. And sometimes when the water goes too still, I get the feeling that whatever it was is still moving, just deeper now, following paths I can't see. The first thing I noticed was the shadow above the bookshelf moving when nothing else was. I was sitting on the couch with my feet up on the coffee table, half watching something I'd already seen, just letting the noise fill the room. It was late, a little after 11, and the house was quiet in that normal way it gets at night when the furnace kicks on and off and everything else settles. One lamp was on in the corner by the window, warm light, nothing harsh. I glanced up because the line where the wall met the ceiling looked wrong. The shadow there, the soft, dark band that always sat in the same place, was sliding, slowly, not flickering, not changing shape, just drifting, like someone was gently pulling it along the ceiling toward the hallway. I froze, remote loose in my hand. My first thought was headlights. A car passing by, light hitting the house at a weird angle. But my place sat back from the road, and there were trees between me and the street. Plus, the movement was steady. Too steady. I leaned forward and watched it for a few seconds. The shadow kept moving in the same direction, smooth and deliberate, like it had a destination. I stood up. The second I shifted my weight, I felt that tight, hollow feeling in my chest you get right before something bad happens. The shadow didn't react. It didn't speed up or stop. It just kept going. I walked to the light switch and flipped it on. The ceiling flooded with light, and the shadow snapped back into its normal place instantly, like nothing had happened. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening. The house sounded normal. No footsteps, no creaks out of place. The TV kept playing behind me. I turned the lamp off again. The shadow stayed still. I told myself it was my eyes, or fatigue, or the angle of the lamp. I sat back down, trying to shake the feeling that something had already happened and I'd missed it. About a minute later, the shadows started moving again. This time I could see it wasn't just one. The entire line along the ceiling was drifting together, every shadow sliding in the same direction toward the front of the house. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I stood again, slower this time, careful not to make sudden movements. My skin prickled, like static. I walked to the window. The glass was cold against my fingertips as I pulled the curtain back a few inches. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same as always. Dark houses, a few porch lights, the street empty. But above the rooftops, just above the tree line, there was a faint light moving across the sky. It wasn't bright. It was barely there, like someone had smudged a pale gray glow across the stars and was slowly dragging it sideways. No blinking, no sound. It moved in a perfectly straight line. As it passed overhead, the shadows inside the house kept sliding in the same direction. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding, and looked up at the ceiling again. The shadows were still moving, still smooth, still unbroken. Then everything stopped. The light outside vanished without fading. The shadows froze where they were, then gently slid back to where they belonged, as if released. The silence afterward felt wrong, too complete, like the air had been muted. I stood there for a long time before I realized my jaw hurt from clenching it. I checked my phone. No alerts. No missed calls. The time read 11:24. I could have sworn it had been closer to 11:15 when I first noticed the shadow. I slept with all the lights on that night. The next day, nothing felt off. I went to work, talked to people. The world stayed where it was supposed to be. By the afternoon, the whole thing already felt unreal, like something I'd imagined while half asleep. That night, it happened again. Not the light, just the shadows. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the line above the bathroom mirror shifting. Same direction, same speed. I didn't even finish brushing. I rinsed, turned on every light in the house, and sat on the couch until I fell asleep, sitting upright. The third night, I didn't see anything. The fourth night, I did. This time, I was ready. I left the lights low on purpose and sat in the living room with the curtains open. I didn't turn the TV on. I just waited. Around 11:30, the shadows started drifting. My heart started racing immediately, but I forced myself to stay still. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the faint light appeared again, sliding silently across the sky, same path as before. It was clearer this time, wider, close enough that the stars behind it dimmed slightly as it passed. The shadows followed it exactly. I felt pressure build in my ears like altitude change and a low vibration deep in my chest, more felt than heard. The house itself seemed to hum, just barely. I grabbed my phone and lifted it, pointing the camera at the ceiling. The moment the screen lit up, the vibration stopped. The shadows snapped back. Outside, the light vanished. My phone screen showed nothing but a normal ceiling. I checked the time, 11:47. 17 minutes gone. I didn't sit in the dark again after that. I started leaving lights on overnight, sleeping with the TV running, anything to keep shadows from forming. A week later, my neighbor Mark asked if I'd seen anything strange in the sky lately. He said his dog had been acting weird at night, staring up and whining at the same time every evening. I told him no. I didn't want to explain how the shadows in my house seemed to know where the light was before I did. I still live there. The shadows haven't moved like that again. Not yet. But sometimes late at night when I'm sitting quietly and the room is dim, I swear I feel the light before it shows up, like a pressure shift or the sense of being slightly out of sync with everything else. When that happens, I don't look up anymore. I turn on every light I can reach and wait for the feeling to pass. I was standing in the middle of a hayfield when it happened. It was just after midnight, late summer, the kind of night that stays warm even after the sun's been gone for hours. I lived outside a small town in eastern Colorado then, renting a little farmhouse that sat alone between two long stretches of farmland. No close neighbors, no streetlights, no noise except insects and the occasional truck miles away on the highway. I'd gone outside because I couldn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. I worked irregular hours at a grain elevator, and my sleep schedule was wrecked most weeks. When I couldn't shut my brain off, I'd step outside and look at the sky. Out there, the stars were ridiculous. So many of them, it almost looked fake. I walked past the barn and into the field behind the house, stopping about 50 yards out where the grass had been cut low. The ground still smelled like hay and dust. I leaned back, hands on my hips, staring straight up. Everything looked normal at first. The Milky Way was faint but visible, a pale smear cutting across the sky. A few satellites crept along if you watched long enough. I remember spotting one and tracking it just out of habit until it disappeared near the horizon. I checked my phone. 12:17 a.m. No signal, as usual. I stuck it back in my pocket. That's when the stars started to blur. It wasn't sudden. At first, it looked like my eyes were having trouble focusing. Like when you've been staring at one spot too long and everything goes soft. I blinked hard a few times and rubbed one eye with the heel of my hand. It didn't fix it. The stars were still there, but their edges smeared slightly, stretching just enough to look wrong. Not streaking, not moving, just unfocused. Like the sky had depth for a second, and my eyes couldn't decide where to lock in. I tilted my head, then turned slowly in a circle, keeping my eyes on the sky. The blur stayed consistent overhead, no matter which direction I faced. The horizon looked fine. The barn roof looked sharp. The trees along the fence line were clear. Only the stars were affected. I remember a weird thought crossing my mind. This is what a camera sees when it's adjusting. That thought made my stomach tighten. The insects stopped. I didn't notice it right away, not consciously, but there was a sudden absence that made the night feel hollow. No crickets, no buzzing, no wind through the grass, just dead, empty quiet. I held my breath without meaning to. The blur intensified. Not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't pick out constellations anymore. The stars looked like tiny white fingerprints smeared across black glass. I whispered something, I don't even remember what, just to hear my own voice. It sounded wrong, too loud, like the air wasn't absorbing sound the way it should. Then everything snapped back, instantly, no transition. One moment the sky was wrong, the next it was razor sharp again, every star in place. The Milky Way crisp, depth gone. At the same time, the night sounds rushed back in like someone had opened a door. Crickets, wind, a distant engine somewhere far off. I gasped, realizing I hadn't been breathing properly. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I checked my phone again. 12:28 a.m. 11 minutes had passed. I knew that couldn't be right. I hadn't stood there that long. The blur itself couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds. A minute, maybe. I tried to reconstruct the moment in my head, but it felt slippery, like recalling a dream right after waking up. I walked back toward the house, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. Halfway there, I turned around, expecting, hoping to see something in the field. A light, a shape, anything that would explain the time. The field was empty. Over the next few days, little things felt off. I overslept twice, which I never did. Once, I woke up standing in the shower with the water running cold, no memory of getting in. Another morning, I found dirt on my boots, even though I hadn't worn them since the previous afternoon. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. That happens. But then Mark saw me. Mark lived a mile down the road, closer to the highway. We'd known each other since high school, and he sometimes stopped by after late shifts to have a beer on my porch. 2 nights after the field incident, he pulled up around 1 a.m. I answered the door half asleep. He looked at me strangely and said, "Man, you okay?" I asked what he meant. "I drove past your place about midnight," he said. "You were out in the field." I laughed and told him he was mistaken. "I'm not," he said. "You were just standing there, not moving. I flashed my headlights, but you didn't react." My mouth went dry. I asked him what time exactly. "A couple minutes after 12, he said. "I remember because the radio host was doing that stupid midnight shout-out thing." I didn't tell him about the sky. I just shrugged and said I couldn't sleep. That night, I didn't go outside. A week passed. Nothing else happened. The nights felt normal again. The sky behaved itself. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been some kind of temporary vision issue. Maybe blood pressure. Maybe dehydration. People black out and don't realize it. Then, about a month later, I was back out in the field again. This time, it was early morning, just before dawn. I'd woken up restless and stepped outside without thinking. The horizon was starting to lighten, the stars fading slowly. I stood in almost the same spot as before. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, for just a split second, the stars didn't fade with the dawn. They stayed bright, sharp, fully visible against a sky that should have been washing them out. It was like two images overlapped and hadn't synced yet. I felt that same pressure in my ears, that same hollow quiet. Then the light caught up. The stars dimmed properly. The world continued. I went back inside and sat on the floor until the sun came up. I moved out of that house a few months later for unrelated reasons. New job, new town. I still look at the sky when I can. Still track satellites, still notice things most people don't bother with. But sometimes, when the night is very clear, I get the feeling that clarity itself is temporary. Like focus is something applied, not guaranteed. Like whatever keeps things sharp can slip just for a moment. And if you happen to be looking up when it does, you notice. Every light in the park went out at the same time. I was halfway down the main path, the one that cuts through the center with the old oak trees and the benches that always smell faintly like rain. It was just after 9, late enough that most people were gone, but not so late that it felt unsafe. The sky was overcast, low clouds glowing faintly orange from the city. The air was warm and still, that kind of summer night where sounds carry farther than they should. The lights didn't flicker, they didn't dim. They shut off like someone flipped a single switch. The path disappeared under my feet. The trees collapsed into one dark mass. For half a second, my eyes didn't know what to do with it. I stopped walking automatically, heart jumping, waiting for my vision to catch up. That was when I noticed how quiet it got. Not peaceful quiet. More like the sound had been muted. I couldn't hear traffic from the street anymore, even though it was only a block away. The cicadas that had been buzzing nonstop went silent all at once. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. Someone laughed nervously behind me. "Did that just happen?" a guy said somewhere to my left. I turned, trying to place voices in the dark, but the shadows felt thicker than they should have. The glow from the city should have been enough to outline people. It wasn't. Then I looked up. The clouds were moving, but not the way clouds usually do. One section of darkness slid across them, smoother and faster, like a shadow passing over frosted glass. It didn't have a clear edge, but it blocked out the faint orange glow behind it completely. It wasn't shaped like anything I could name. Not round, not angular, just wrong in a way that made my eyes keep sliding off it. Someone near the benches whispered, "Is that a helicopter?" There was no sound. No chop of blades. No hum. Nothing. The dark shape moved from west to east, directly overhead. As it passed, the air felt heavier, like the pressure drop before a storm, except it didn't come with wind. My ears popped slightly. I swallowed and felt it in my jaw. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. I hadn't realized I was gripping it. No notification, just a vibration like it had lost signal and found it again. The shape crossed the park in maybe 3 seconds. The instant it cleared the far side, every light snapped back on. Path lights, lampposts, the old decorative lanterns near the playground. All of it, bright and normal, like nothing had happened. The cicadas started up again, mid-buzz, not ramping up, just continuing like they'd never stopped. Traffic noise rushed back in, too loud for a second before settling. People stood frozen where they were. A woman near the path said, "What the hell was that?" No one answered her. A couple with a stroller hurried toward the exit without looking back. The guy who'd laughed earlier pulled his phone out and started filming the sky, even though there was nothing there now but clouds. I stayed where I was, staring up, waiting for my pulse to slow down. It didn't. After a minute or two, people started talking over each other, trying to fill the silence. Power outage, transformer, city grid glitch. Someone joked about aliens, but it came out thin and forced. I walked home as soon as my legs remembered how. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time a car passed outside my apartment, I woke up, convinced the sound had stopped again. The next morning, the city's outage map showed nothing. No reports, no maintenance logs. I checked local news sites, nothing. I went back to the park the following evening, telling myself I needed to see it in daylight. Everything looked normal. The grass was a little worn near the benches where people had clustered. That was it. I tried to convince myself it was a one-off. Some freak electrical thing combined with my imagination filling in gaps. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was sitting on a bench near the pond, scrolling through my phone. A guy named Marcus was tossing a tennis ball for his dog a little ways off. I remember his name because he'd introduced himself earlier when the dog decided my shoe was a toy. The lights went out exactly the same way. Instant. Total. The dog froze mid-run, ball rolling to a stop beside it. It didn't bark. It didn't move. Just stood there, staring upward. Marcus said, "Hey," sharply, like he was scolding it. I looked up just in time to see the dark shape again. It was lower this time. I could tell because it blocked out more of the sky, and the sense of pressure was stronger, like something heavy passing just above the treetops. I stood without realizing I was doing it. The shape didn't cast a shadow the way you'd expect. The darkness seemed contained within it, like it was subtracting light rather than blocking it. As it passed overhead, my phone screen went black. Not off, black. The glow disappeared, but the device stayed warm in my hand. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on hot pavement, even though it hadn't rained. The lights snapped back on. Marcus swore loudly. "Okay. Nope, we're leaving." His dog bolted the second the lights came back, nearly yanking the leash out of his hand. Other people reacted faster this time. Joggers broke into sprints. A couple near the pond climbed the path toward the street without saying a word. I stood there a few seconds longer, staring at the empty sky. My phone restarted itself with a chime. I checked the time. I was missing 4 minutes. Not skipped notifications, not a frozen screen. The system clock showed a clean jump. I checked my step tracker out of habit. There was a gap there too. No data, just a flat line. I didn't tell anyone about that part. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing smaller things. Lights in the park would dim for half a second, then return to normal. The air would go still without warning. Sounds would drop out for a beat, then resume slightly out of sync, like an audio track catching up. Once, walking through at dusk, I felt that pressure again and looked up just in time to see the clouds ripple, like something had passed between layers. No blackout that time, just the feeling. I stopped going through the park at night after that. Months passed. I was almost convinced it was over when it happened a third time, earlier than before. Late afternoon. Kids still on the playground. Clear sky. Every light went out. People screamed that time. I didn't see the shape clearly, just a dark movement overhead, faster than before. Purposeful. The lights came back on immediately. No missing time, no phone issues. Parents grabbed kids, someone called 911. I left before anyone could start asking questions. I still live nearby. Sometimes late at night, I hear the park go quiet from my apartment window. Not silent, just muted. When that happens, I don't look up. I wait for the lights I can't see from here to come back on, and I try not to think about how something that large could move that smoothly without making a sound. I still walk through the park during the day, but I never stay after dark anymore, and I don't trust the sky when it looks too still. I was driving back to my place outside Tillamook after visiting a friend in town, taking the back roads because the main highway was thick with late-season tourists. It was close to midnight, and a heavy fog had rolled in from the coast, one of those dense, wet blankets that swallow sound and make the trees loom twice their size. My wipers were on the lowest setting, brushing away mist more than rain. I'd taken this road hundreds of times. It wound between patches of forest and small open fields, eventually dropping down toward my cabin near the river. The fog didn't bother me. What bothered me was how quiet everything felt. Even with the windows up, I usually heard frogs or the ocean wind drifting inland. maybe a distant truck on 101. But that night, there was nothing. Just the soft hum of my engine and the steady click of the wipers. I rounded a bend where the forest rises sharply on both sides, the trees forming tall walls of dark shapes. That was when a cluster of lights appeared above the tree line. At first, I thought it was a plane banking low, but these lights were too slow, too smooth, and too close. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them. Soft, white-yellow dots arranged loosely in a curve. Not twinkling, not bright, just steady. They glowed through the fog in this muted, almost unreal way, like lanterns behind frosted glass. I'd never seen lights like that above the woods. I eased my foot off the gas, but didn't stop. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a helicopter or maybe a group of paragliders with LED rigs, even though that made no sense at all at midnight in thick coastal fog. The lights moved together, not rigid, not perfectly aligned, but with a kind of shared rhythm. Imagine how small fish move in a group, drifting in the same direction without touching. That's what it reminded me of. They floated slowly above the tree line on my left, maybe 30 feet above the highest branches. No sound, no breeze, no engine hum, just that steady drift. I rolled down the window halfway. Silence. Total silence. Even the usual drip of moisture from the branches seemed absent. The air was wet and cold, hitting my face in little pinpricks, but it carried no noise at all. The lights shifted slightly, turning, or maybe rotating, I couldn't tell. The fog distorted their edges, making them look like soft orbs instead of sharp points. They passed over the road ahead of me, slow and deliberate, moving toward the opposite side of the forest. I stopped the car without realizing it. My headlights lit up the fog in front of me, creating that tunnel effect where you can only see a few feet ahead. The lights above cut through it more cleanly somehow, like the fog bent around them instead of swallowing them. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lights began to descend, not drastically, just a few feet, but enough that I caught myself gripping the wheel tighter. They hovered there for a moment, swaying almost imperceptibly, and I felt the same sensation you get when someone stands behind you without speaking. A kind of awareness, pressure, attention, whatever you want to call it. Then the fog shifted. A light breeze rolled in from the west, thinning the mist in pieces. My headlights reached farther. I blinked, trying to clear the moisture from my eyelashes. When I looked up again, the lights were gone. The tree line was dark and empty. The fog drifted across the branches like normal. Nothing moved above them. I rolled the window all the way down, listening. Still nothing. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were waiting for something. I swallowed and stepped out of the car, not sure what I expected to hear or see. The gravel under my boots sounded sharper than usual. My breath formed a shaky cloud in the air. I walked a few steps toward the ditch at the edge of the road. The smell of damp earth was strong, almost metallic. The forest loomed on both sides, black and impenetrable. Something snapped, a twig or a branch, deep among the trees on my right. I froze. The sound echoed far too cleanly through the fog, like the forest had been holding its breath until that moment. I strained my ears, but no follow-up sound came. The woods didn't return to their normal rustling, they just stayed unnaturally still. A soft vibration passed through the air. Not loud, more like the faint hum of distant machinery, but there was no machinery out there. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then faded. I backed up toward the car, not taking my eyes off the tree line. The fog thickened again as the breeze died. The whole atmosphere seemed to close in. Once inside the car, I locked the doors, which felt ridiculous, considering whatever I'd seen wasn't the kind of thing a lock would matter to, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. I turned the headlights off for a moment, just to see if the darkness revealed anything. Nothing, just black trees and shifting fog. When I turned the headlights back on, my rearview mirror flashed white for a split second, like something reflective had caught the beam. I whipped around to look out the back window, but all I saw was fog and faint outlines of trees. I don't know why, but I started driving without checking my directions. Instinct more than logic. The fog swallowed the road in front of me, but I kept going exactly the speed needed to avoid outdriving my headlights. My fingers felt numb on the wheel. For the next mile, the forest remained silent. Too silent. Even as the fog thinned near the river turnoff, the usual chorus of frogs was absent. No owls, no rustling, just the sound of my tires on damp pavement. Right before I reached my driveway, the woods behind me lit up faintly. Not a flash, not bright, just a soft glow filtering through the fog, like the lights were drifting somewhere beyond the trees again. I didn't stop to look. I pulled into my drive, hurried inside, and double-checked every lock, even though it made no logical sense. Much later that night, when I finally looked out the window toward the tree line, the fog had mostly lifted. The forest looked normal again, peaceful, untouched. But the quiet lingered until sunrise. Too deep, too whole, as if the woods hadn't yet decided it was safe to make noise again. And even now, whenever fog rolls in from the coast and settles low over the trees, I catch myself watching for those soft, drifting lights to reappear, not bright enough to scare me outright, but strange enough to make me question whether they were ever meant to be seen at all. I was walking the neighborhood loop the night it happened, something I'd started doing after work to clear my head. It was early October, cool enough that I could see my breath, but not cold enough for gloves yet. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke from someone's backyard fire pit. It was a quiet suburb outside Asheville. Nothing dramatic, just a grid of cul-de-sacs and small hills. It was close to 10 p.m., later than I usually went out, but I'd been restless and needed to move. The streetlights were spaced far apart on my route, leaving long stretches of shadow between them, the kind where your eyes have to work harder to adjust. Houses were mostly dark, except for the occasional blue glow of a TV behind curtains. I'd walked maybe half a mile when I noticed the sound. At first, I thought it was a transformer buzzing, or maybe an AC unit that hadn't fully shut off, but it wasn't coming from the houses. It wasn't coming from anywhere on the ground, actually. It was above me, a soft metallic humming, steady, low, weirdly smooth. It wasn't loud, but it had a clean, unnatural precision to it, like the vibration you feel from electronics when you put your ear close. I kept walking another few steps, trying to pinpoint it. The humming stayed above me, moving with me, not staying fixed to any one yard or rooftop. I stopped. The sound stopped exactly when I did. My breath puffed out in a slow cloud. I listened hard. No insects, no distant cars, no dogs barking. Total stillness except for a faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Then the hum started again. Slow, gradual, like a machine warming up. I looked across the street to see if maybe someone had an attic fan running. All the houses were dark. I stepped into the middle of the road to get a clearer angle on the sky. That was when I noticed the clouds. They were thin that night, patchy streaks drifting lazily overhead. Most of them were just faint gray smudges against the dark. But one section, almost directly above me, was glowing softly. Not bright enough to illuminate anything below. Just a faint, diffused white light pulsing through the edges of the cloud, as if someone had put a lantern inside it. The humming grew stronger, not louder exactly, but more present, like the air molecules around me were tightening in response. I craned my neck, squinting at the glowing patch. It didn't look like moonlight. The moon was behind me and low on the horizon anyway, and no plane I'd ever seen could create that kind of consistent light through cloud cover. There were no flashes, no red or green navigation lights, no noise except the hum. I took a few steps backward down the road to see the cloud from a different angle. The glow didn't shift or change. It stayed exactly in the same part of the cloud, even though the clouds were drifting, which meant either the cloud wasn't drifting or something behind it was moving with it. "Hello?" I said out loud, despite not knowing why. The humming responded immediately by stopping. The cloud went completely dark. My heart hammered. I felt ridiculous, talking to a cloud. But nothing about that moment felt ordinary. The silence that followed was too heavy, like it was waiting for something. I stood there, middle of the street, listening. 20, maybe 30 seconds passed. Then the glow returned, but dimmer, slow, like it was testing the sky before revealing itself again. The hum returned too, but this time it had a slight pulse to it, almost like a slow heartbeat. The glow grew stronger, brightening gradually inside the cloud, until the entire patch looked like it was being lit from within in by something the size of a van. The edges of the cloud curled slightly, like heat was distorting the moisture, except the air didn't feel warm. It felt colder, sharper. The hairs on my arms and neck lifted. I took a step forward. The glow didn't react. The hum stayed steady. I took another step. The cloud snapped to darkness. Not faded. Snapped like a switch flipping off. One moment it was glowing, the next it was indistinguishable from every other patch of night sky. The hum cut out at the exact same millisecond. I froze. Didn't even inhale. There was no sound. No wind. Even the leaves stopped rustling. The entire neighborhood felt like it had paused. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning for anything. Movement, light, sound. Nothing. I exhaled shakily and started walking again, faster than before, trying to tell myself it was just atmospheric conditions or some weird distant spotlight I couldn't see. But the logic didn't sit right. The timing was too precise. The way the sound followed me, the way the light appeared and vanished exactly when I moved. It all felt deliberate. A minute later, the hum returned. Soft, distant at first. I didn't look up. I just kept walking, pretending I couldn't hear it. The hum grew a little louder, like it was drifting closer overhead. After a few seconds, I couldn't resist. I stopped walking and looked up again. The clouds above me were ordinary, dark, shifting, harmless. But a second later, the patch I'd seen earlier drifted into view again, carried by the wind. It passed right above me, gray and thin. As it did, a faint outline appeared inside it. Not a light, not a shape, more like a subtle distortion. The cloud bulging inward from behind as if something was pressing up against it, only for a moment. Then it slid past, the distortion evening out like nothing had touched it. I stood rooted to the sidewalk until the cloud drifted farther east. The hum faded the same way, gradually, naturally, until I wasn't sure if it was gone or simply too faint to detect anymore. I forced myself to finish the loop, though I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every time I passed under a streetlight, I felt exposed. Every time I stepped into shadow, I felt watched. When I reached my house, I went straight inside and locked the door. My hands were cold enough that the key slipped twice. I stood at the window for a bit, staring out at the street. Everything looked normal. Someone across the way turned on their porch light. A cat ran under a parked car. The neighborhood had resumed its usual rhythms. Before bed, I stepped outside for one last look. Just a quick check. The sky was darker now, clouds lower and thicker. No glow, no hum. But as I turned to go back inside, I heard one faint metallic ping, like a cooling engine or a metal plate being tapped. I froze. The sound came from above the clouds. Not loud, but perfectly clear. Then silence. I backed into the house, keeping my eyes on the sky until the door was fully closed. I haven't heard the hum since that night. But now, whenever thin clouds drift overhead on late walks, I catch myself listening, waiting for that soft metallic sound to rise out of the dark, for the faint glow to pulse behind the clouds again, just long enough to let me know something is there before vanishing like it never happened. I noticed the lights starting to act strange halfway down Alder Street, right after I passed the little corner market that always smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. It was around 10:45 p.m. early fall, one of those nights where the air feels cool but not cold, and everything has that damp, quiet heaviness. I'd stayed late at my friend Matt's place helping him move furniture around his apartment, and I didn't feel like waiting 40 minutes for the bus, so I decided to walk the 20 minutes back to my place. Alder was usually well lit, old metal street lamps every 30 yards or so, buzzing faintly, the kind of orange glow that made everything look slightly washed out. That night, though, the far end of the block looked dimmer than usual. I thought maybe a bulb was out. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it wasn't one bulb. It was all of them, going dark one by one. The lamp closest to me was on. The next one flickered, then went black. 2 seconds later, the next one flickered. Then, black. Like dominoes. I slowed down. There was no power outage. The houses on either side of the street still had porch lights on, TVs flickering behind curtains. Just the street lamps were shutting off, and they were doing it in a perfect sequence down the block. I stopped walking entirely when the fifth light blinked out. The darkness was creeping toward me like a curtain being pulled shut. I waited for the lamps behind me, the ones closer to the market, to go out too, but they stayed steady, buzzing normally. Only the ones ahead were failing. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue. Something underground. A breaker tripping. The stupid explanations your brain reaches for, even when they don't fit what you're seeing. The sixth lamp flickered hard enough that the bulb inside rattled, then died. There were two more between me and the big intersection at Cedar Avenue. I could still see some light from the intersection spill into the dark stretch, but it wasn't enough to make me feel better. I checked my phone out of habit. No bars, not unusual for that area, but it made me feel more alone than I should have. I debated turning around and going back to Matt's instead of continuing, but the idea of walking back past all the houses with dark front yards somehow felt worse. At least the intersection ahead had traffic lights and usually a few cars passing. The seventh lamp died. I took a slow step backward. My heel scraped the pavement louder than it should have. I kept staring into the dark ahead, expecting to see someone. Maybe a city worker in a bucket truck or kids messing with the breaker box. But there was nobody. Just the empty street. The eighth lamp, the one closest to me, flickered wildly, like the bulb was being shaken inside the casing, then blinked out. That left me standing right at the edge of a long, perfect stretch of darkness. The whole block ahead was black now. Not dim, black. Like the light from the intersection couldn't penetrate it fully. My eyes should have adjusted, but they didn't. The dark felt thick. That's when I heard the faint shimmer. Shimmer isn't the right word, but I can't think of a better one. It wasn't a hum or a buzz or a whistle. It was like tiny pieces of glass brushing together, soft, high-pitched, almost delicate. And it came from above me. I tilted my head back slowly. There was nothing in the sky, no plane, no drone, no bird, just a faint blur passing across the stars, as if someone dragged translucent cloth overhead. It didn't block the stars exactly. It warped them, bent them slightly, like heat haze at night, but colder somehow. The shimmer passed directly over me, and all 8 streetlights flickered back to life at the same moment. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The lamps buzzed harder than usual, like they were waking up from sleep. For a few seconds, the entire block looked too bright, as if the bulbs were running beyond their normal power. The shimmering sound faded as whatever that was moved farther down the road. The blur above me drifted towards Cedar Avenue, distorting the sky as it went. When it reached the intersection, the traffic lights turned yellow. Not blinking, solid yellow. All 4 directions. Cars slowed awkwardly, unsure what to do. I watched one driver roll down his window like he was about to shout at someone. The blur hovered briefly above the crossing, or maybe it just moved slower there, and then continued east toward the river. As soon as it left the intersection, the traffic lights snapped back to normal red-green patterns. The street lamps behind it flickered again, but stayed on this time. I stood frozen for a while, unsure whether to keep walking or just go back to Matt's and make up some excuse to crash on his couch. Eventually, I forced myself forward, partly because standing alone under those lights felt worse than walking. I kept glancing up, even though the blur was gone from sight. Every time I passed under a lamp, I listened for the shimmer, but the only things I heard were distant cars and the rustle of leaves. When I reached the intersection, a man in a red hoodie was standing on the corner smoking. He kept looking up too, the same way I probably had been. When I passed, he said, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger. I crossed Cedar and continued toward my apartment. The closer I got to home, the more normal everything seemed. Dogs barking behind fences, a porch light flickering because someone hadn't replaced the bulb, the distant sound of a train. But every time I stepped under a street lamp, I waited for it to die. 3 blocks from home, the streetlights stayed steady, but the air changed again. The temperature dropped fast, like stepping into an air-conditioned room. I rubbed my arms, confused. I could see my breath for maybe 3 seconds before the air warmed back up, as if whatever passed overhead had left a cold trail hanging behind. I didn't hear the shimmer again, but the sudden cold felt like the same thing, just quieter. When I finally reached my building, I practically jogged up the stairs. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt too normal. My kitchen light humming its usual hum, the clock on the stove blinking 10:56 like nothing had happened. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing strange happened. No darkened lamps, no shimmering sky, no warped stars. Around midnight, I heard something faint outside. Not the shimmer, just a soft click, as the streetlight in front of my building turned off for its scheduled cycle. It startled me anyway. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked the exact same route to see if anything looked weird in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. The lamps intact, the intersection normal, the air a mild fall temperature. But halfway down Alder, where the last lamp had gone dark the night before, I found a patch of asphalt that looked polished. That's the only word I could think of. Not wet, not scraped. Polished. A smooth circle about 2 feet wide, like something had hovered just above it long enough to burnish the pavement. No one else seemed to notice it. Some days I walk through that block without thinking about it. Other days, especially when the air gets oddly still or when the lamps buzz a little louder than usual, I catch myself looking up, waiting for the sky to bend again, waiting for that faint shimmer to announce something drifting just overhead, invisible except for the way it snuffs out the light as it passes.